his
not
hair.
fake.
I've seen videos of you speaking without the accent, dog.
Right, but the videos are 3 years old, so obviously my accent will develop over.
Metaphysical principles as like these things that we use. These, I guess, not really ideas. Would they be ideas?
Well, I mean, ideas are a metaphysical principle, but there's a lot of different metaphysical principles.
I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Gotta get my water. All right. Welcome one, welcome all. Just gonna be doing our normal stuff today. Talking. I want to get to the bottom of what your guys' worldview is. So if anyone feels brave enough to start that conversation, certainly join the Discord. It should be linked in the description. I'm gonna get it started, and in the meantime, we're gonna see how we can systematically, evaluate our worldview and make sure that it's grounded in something reasonable and true. Okay, Discord is up and running. We'll do the transcendental argument for now until somebody wants to sort of get into it and tell us what they think.
And so and they're all connected, and they're like a string of pearls that's contained in the divine mind.
Well, I was talking about transcendental categories, which are presuppositions for the possibility, preconditions for the possibility of knowledge. So time and space, the self, abstract concepts, laws of logic. I mean, those are all examples of things that we can't directly empirically prove, causation, teleology, but they must be the case for there to be knowledge at all.
Right, and so okay, so
and they don't stand alone. They don't stand alone. They don't stand alone in a vacuum. So
yeah, right.
You
they
can't
have to be contained in the mind.
Right, so they have to be grounded somewhere in a way in which they all sort of work in a synergistic way together. Because clearly causation is not identical to teleology or purpose. So they're distinct things, but they're also, in a sense, have to be connected. Because if we're theists, then the world has a cause, causation exists, and there's also purpose and an end for which the causes occur. So causation and teleology go together in the theistic worldview.
Right. So, okay, and I've heard you say that, this is, only possible in a Orthodox worldview, right?
Right, because a lot of
My question is why? Like, why could that not
because
be?
a lot of positions. Why could
they not argue?
Because when you look at all of these things working together, it necessitates a certain type of metaphysic, not just any metaphysic. And so it leads us to a Trinitarian metaphysic, the kind of God that we see in Orthodox Christianity that avoids the theological traps and problems of modal collapse, absolute divine simplicity, monism, dualism, etc. Those are all dead-end positions that the other theistic systems won't work. They don't suffice to ground the things that we're talking about.
All right. Also, I would add to, Jay and I did, a stream on the Garrity article, and this is really important too, is that you don't treat each religion just as kind of a ground up, or we just tap these different things, and this will work, like kind of bare minimum. But as Garrity says, each philosophy and paradigm is equivalent to what we would call in analytic philosophy and philosophy of language and logic is truth conjunctions. So I'm not going to go too far into detail, but basically every religion or philosophy has a set of propositions about its beliefs such that if you were to take any one of those out.
Welcome everybody. We got some new viewers in the chat here. So what we're doing today is we're auditing our own worldviews. Okay, so if anybody feels comfortable or interested or wants to drop a question or a statement about your own worldview, how you perceive religion, logic, existence itself, drop that in the chat, or even better, go ahead and join the Discord link that's in the description, which I believe it is. Okay, it's not in the description, so I'll drop it here. Go ahead and join that, and we can get to some interesting conversations. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously if you're new here, but my worldview is the Christian paradigm, the Christian worldview. So if you have anything that you want to, how you see it, all are welcome. I happily encourage you to either drop it in the chat or, of course, join the Discord. In the meantime, we're learning about the transcendental argument. This is what we're going to use, basically, to evaluate our worldviews to see which ones stand up to reason. Okay.
It changes the whole truth about the conjunction of all those. And therefore, as part of like orthodoxy too, is that it is the fullness of truth and that there is no other. So it's basically saying this is true and all the others are false and does not provide a conditions for the possibility of knowledge. So now you have something in a disjunctive argument. It's either orthodoxy or it's not orthodoxy. Part of orthodoxy says that all the other ones are false. So for you to negate that orthodoxy is true or question that, what I show is that it ends up, you're going to be committed to something or believing something in order to negate one of those truth conditions of orthodoxy that will end up as a defeater for knowledge. That's just one of many arguments that we present. Jay just presented one too, that it's not, yeah. Well, as long as I just get the Trinity, I don't know, like a Jesus that's incarnate and a Bible and divine revelation, that'll be enough. That's not enough. It's a whole, it's...
Welcome, Ogum the Bold. Economics Discord life ban for saying heterodox. What? You got banned for life for saying heterodox? Isn't that a totally normal word? I don't think Kanye made a song about that yet. Explain that, brother. What do you mean by that? And welcome to the channel, of course. That's crazy. So, does that mean you can't join the Discord because you will use the word heterodox?
It's a whole system that includes, it's either the whole or it's not the whole. And if it's not the whole, in order to assert that, you'll be... it's self-supplication. It would be a defeater for knowledge in order to assert that. So as Jay and I always say, from the impossibility of the contrary, orthodox, it only works in an orthodox position. Jay, I don't know if you want to say some more about that.
Yeah, let's look at some examples of things that are preconditions for the possibility of knowledge, right? We could look at the self. How do we speak about knowledge without a knower, right? Doesn't it seem to necessitate some even though I can't perfectly define it, what a self is or what a knower is? I mean, to talk about knowledge assumes that there's some being or agent.
It was in their rules. Too long, didn't read. Wow. But they can ban you from all of Discord for life for not following a specific Discord's rules. It's kind of wild. That's why I don't like having rules on my Discord, but my my moderator, he recommended it, which I understand. I understand the purpose of it. That's tragic, man. That's tragic. I'm still curious about the context. Like, it doesn't seem like in their rules it specifically said do not use the word heterodox, or did it say like don't have heterodox opinions? Because that's even funnier. I'm endlessly curious about this saga, Ogum the Bold, and I promise you I won't ban you for saying anything. I won't ban you for saying nothing. My mod, on the other hand, who knows? But we'll see. I'm just kidding. He won't either. That's nuts, man.
To has agency to know, to will not to know, or to have intentionality. So I'm going to say that any action of knowledge is assuming or presupposing a self, agency, or intentionality. Knowing for humans, I think you could argue requires some conception of space-time. I may not know exactly how space-time works, but humans are constituted such that they learn things in space-time in a beginning, middle, end sequence. So I think space-time is a precondition of knowledge. I think that unity and diversity are categories that are necessary for the preconditions of knowledge, right? Picking out something amongst a class of things, or I could have used one and many, or I could have used genera, species, particular, etc. I think identity over time is an example. Causation and teleology are examples. The laws of logic. You could look at the notion of abstract concepts and meaning. All of these things are examples of things. You could list more, but these are examples of things that any action, any possible action of knowing, any knowledge event, requires these types of things. These things are not under the immediate purview of the action of knowledge, right? So for me to say that the tree outside my office is green, even though I'm not studying these things on my whiteboard here, these things on the whiteboard already have to be the case as preconditions for me to be able to say something like the tree is green, and for that to be actually the case, right? So we're gonna.
Okay, you only got a ban from economics Discord because you did mention your college physics prize. Okay, seems like a particularly strict. What was their economics like? What actually, this is curious. This is somewhat relevant. We can go to this. What is your economic worldview? Are you, and we can start simply and we can go from there, but like, do you lean towards free market capitalism, or, total communist socialism, or whatever it is, or somewhere in between, or something nuanced, or something totally other? Because I'd be curious. And we'll see, maybe we can even translate your economic worldview into this larger structure of worldview claims that you have. And yeah, you definitely will not get banned from my Discord if you do choose to join at that link. So just let me know, brother, and I am interested. I'm interested. It sounds like they were jealous that you won a physics prize and thought that was irrelevant to economics, although I don't think it is at all irrelevant. I think it's probably very relevant. I don't know. Physics probably has a lot of knowledge that can be translated into economics, but interesting. We're happy to have you, even though the economics Discord is not. That sounds like a pit of vipers, doesn't it? The economics Discord. I bet things get tense over there.
We're going to say that, assuming for the sake of argument that is the case, just as a test example of some knowledge event, right? Some predication event, the possibility of predication, right? These things, at least, and many other things probably that you could flesh out, would have to be the case to be able to say the tree is green. These are preconditions, and they're prior to any evidentialist type of knowledge. That's why we keep stressing this against evidentialists, is that I'm not going to grant to the atheist his evidentialist claims about this or that thing when he hasn't accounted for these things, which are necessary for evidential claims at all, you see. Now, when I look at these things, it doesn't work for me to say, okay, well, I agree with all these things. Here's the Matt Dillahunty approach. See, all these, they just are. Okay, they just are.
Yep.
That's not a good answer as to, wait a minute. So now you're basically admitting the world is highly structured, such that these metaphysical principles now are the case, Matt Dillahunty. But you told me in your argumentation that you shouldn't believe in anything without empirical proof or evidence. There is no empirical proof or evidence for these principles themselves.
Right.
That's human.
All I know, 1984, Thatcher put me in a forced labor camp. Okay? I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry that the Iron Lady put you in a labor camp. That still tells me nothing about your economic principles, but that is funny. 1984 Thatcher. Is that like, are you saying like the book 1984 plus Margaret Thatcher? Or are you saying that Margaret Thatcher in 1984 put you in a labor camp? Or are you making a tongue-in-cheek joke? Because either way, very interesting. But appreciate you.
Tim's argument, right? So the question then is, how do all of these things work together? Even Phaser admits that these preconditions, these transcendental categories, they don't just stand on their own. They all kind of have to work together. Right? Causation and teleology, they kind of work together. Abstract concepts, they kind of need a mind, right? So my argument is that if you bundle all these together and see how they all kind of synergize, this is actually a very powerful, it's almost like a fine-tuning argument applied to preconditions of knowledge.
Right. I mean, it's a beautiful argument. I just having a hard time grasping it. I mean, I don't, it's just, I'm not used to thinking in such an abstract way as that. And so my original question was, and you and Father Deacon are starting to answer.
Well, let's use Father Deacon's classic example of cake, right?
Well, I was going to say, like, I understand these principles have to be contained in the mind. My question was, well, why couldn't the false Muslim God? Why couldn't that be the mind that is contained in? That was my question. Like, that's what I.
Right. So when we get into doctrines like Islam, if you go listen to my Muslim debates, that's when I start. That's when absolute divine simplicity becomes a problem, because they start reducing God to being one thing. And even though they'll say things like, "Well, Allah has 99 names," it really becomes unclear as to how there's real distinctions in Allah. Right, but so Allah can have 99 names and they can be really distinct, but we're polytheists because we say that God's a triad. You see how it starts to be arbitrary. But also, apart from that question, I mean, what I kept trying to drill down in the debate with Azrar Rashid was about, well, do you think that the divine ideas or the pattern or whatever in the divine mind, do you think that they're identical to Allah as well? Are they also the essence or substance of Allah? And that, in other words, if they don't have the essence energy distinction, that's going to be a problem. But even if they do, if they were somehow able to admit some kind of distinction between essence and energy, it's really not consistent with the rest of the Islamic metaphysics. So I would go into other areas like their occasionalism to refute, the Islamic view. And also, a bare Unitarian view, as we've shown in many live streams, really doesn't work, because is Allah always, is he eternally provident? If he's eternally provident, then there's an eternal creation over which he's provident. But they don't believe the creation is eternal. That's origin, right? I mean, it would lead to originism. That's why, yeah, right. Exactly.
And so, I mean, and we're the only, I'm Orthodox Christian. We're the only church that has essence energy. Like, even Catholics reject that, right?
Correct.
And then you can't, I think I heard you talk about this. Palamas says that you cannot know God because all you would know is just created manifestations. You cannot, if there's no essence energy.
Right. So it depends on what the.
Welcome, David. So many religions, so little time. We've got Agam. He's saying, I'm a Vanguard Gen X. My political economy understanding is that the new Pope outlaws capitalism. Thou shalt not steal. Okay, interesting, brother. It'd be easier to have this conversation in the Discord, but I understand if you just want to chat. Why exactly is capitalism stealing? Okay, so I understand that you can steal within... Okay, and we'll also get to Jackson's point here. You could obviously steal in a capitalistic framework, but what about capitalism intrinsically makes it an economic, like... what gives it the quality of stealing from others? I hear people saying this all the time, like, billionaires became billionaires by stealing from others. Well, it's not that straightforward, it seems. It seems like they mostly become billionaires by creating value, creating jobs, creating products. I know that's not always the case, but if it can happen one way or the other, then you would say that it's not capitalism to blame for stealing. It's something downstream of capitalism or even human nature or something like that. So, yeah, it's not at all obvious to me that capitalism entails stealing. It actually seems like the opposite. Whereas something like socialism or communism or something like that, it necessitates stealing because you must take from the rich to give to the poor. Whereas in capitalism, you can start as the poor, take nothing, and become the rich, and along the way, enrich others. So, top chat is censored. See live chat. My comment was stolen. Okay. Am I not? I don't know. I'm just using. I don't think anything is censored. Again, that's why it'd be better to be in the Discord. Certainly, but that's okay. What was censored? See live. Yeah, see, the problem is I'm using this like thing so I can stream to Twitch and YouTube, and I don't know if I'm able to switch to live chat from my end. So maybe if you want to try it again, or if you want to sum it up, or again, of course, joining the Discord would be the best. Your chat was stolen. So the near infinite capability of human creativity. Great. I like that. And working hard. I know a few billionaires and they are determined, honest, hard workers. Yeah, that's what it seems like. At least I don't know if I know any billionaires per se, but I know about some of them and I know how they made their money. For instance, the one that is most reviled by our culture is probably Elon Musk. And people keep saying, well, he stepped on people, he did this and that to get his billions. But all I see are rockets flying to space, an advanced system of satellites giving Wi-Fi to the entire world. I see electric cars all over the place, which has its own problems, but it doesn't seem intrinsically wrong to make electric cars. It doesn't seem like you steal from anybody to make those. So, yeah, I just don't know where this comes from, this idea. England rents its stolen rain for eternal usury interest. Stolen rain. I don't even know what that means, to be honest. It rents its stolen rain for eternal. David, yeah, you don't know Musk, so you can't comment. Again, of course, I don't know him personally. I just know the things I see, and it don't seem to line up with the cultural, like, hatred towards him. Okay, so yeah, you might have to expand on that, Ogum. That England rents its stolen rain for eternal usury interest. Elon Musk could have died with one of the greatest legacies of human innovators, and he got into politics, and now he's a butt wipe. See, but that's exactly the problem to me. Why? Because somebody makes a political, allegiance or decision, which, by the way, over half of the country also made along with him. Does that wipe out his other good ideas? Even if you disagree with the politics, why does that make him a bad person or whatever? Just the fact that he has the same political, persuasion or agreement as over half the country. Ball Gates. Ball Gates. Bill Gates gets a bad rap and he's giving all of his wealth away. Bill Gates is based. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could see that. I definitely think he does a lot of good stuff for, malaria in Africa. Again, it's someone that created a product, created value, created thousands and thousands of jobs. And we don't malign him. I personally think the things he's doing are less cool than Elon Musk, but that doesn't mean they're not valuable. So I'm not sure why we dislike one and not the other. I should dislike Gates since I worked at Apple. Lol. I used to dislike him, but he's a good man from what I can tell. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And that's funny that you used to work at Apple. That's another guy that gets sort of a mixed rep, Steve Jobs. Whereas people rarely... Grok explains your comment. Should I Google? Do you want me to Grok your comments? I can do that. I can do that. Okay, let's go to Grok and see what this means that England uses stolen rain. How about ChatGPT? Is that good? Because Elon Musk has participated in what is very conservatively characterized as textbook corruption. That is a little more than a smudge on the record. Okay, so explain the corruption to me. What's the corruption? Is it the idea that he is now working with the government? Because doesn't seem like what he's doing with the government, i.e. Doge, i.e. reducing government spending, would actually help him. It seems like that would actually hurt him, considering he has government contracts. Or are you saying he has government contracts, therefore that's corruption? Because I would also disagree with that, but in a different way. So yeah, we could get into that. Okay, so I want to see what Grok has to say. Oh, you knew Steve Jobs and was at Apple. He was there. Interesting guy. Yeah. So that was what I was saying before. Like, Steve Jobs seems like a character that people love the business strategy, the economic strategy, and the creativity and just like the innovation, the freshness of his ideas and his design strategy. But they, I think, rightly critique his relationship with his daughter or whatever, the personal stuff. Well, I don't think it's fair for us to totally, get in on people's personal lives, especially when all we know are news article headlines or whatever. Oh, you did. Damn, Occam's getting censored left and right here. It's hard to believe that you're actually getting censored by writing ChatGPT and whatever else you wrote, but he buys the largest media company on earth to promote a very specific presidential candidate. That implies that he bought Twitter in order to support Donald Trump, when I don't think that's true, considering he bought Twitter, if I remember correctly, during the Biden administration. And maybe you could say he had like some sort of like secret plan to support Trump in the next election, but it doesn't seem like he actually got on board with Trump until about halfway through this presidential election. I don't think he was super... Oh, American. Nice. Did you witness a little miracle? I love to hear this. Praise be to God, I experienced something very crazy last night that I'm unable to explain. I would love to even hear you try to explain if you feel comfortable. If not, otherwise, God bless, brother. That's amazing. I love to hear that. I was hoping something like that would happen for you, brother, because I know you've been looking for something like that. So praise be, my friend. Praise be. Feel free to come on in the chat. We can talk about it. Or, if it's personal, I totally get that. So it's funny that you say he uses the position of the White House to promote his cars, when the only thing that being political has done is reduce sales and the stock price of his cars. So David, of course, is going to try to... makes sense, is try to explain away, ironically, your experience of something that you were unable to explain. But I'm still interested regardless. And just because it doesn't explicitly mean God, it also does not mean God, especially if it's something of a mystical, spiritual nature. And we are still going to look up your comment. Hold on, I just need to find it. England rents its stolen rain. Okay. Yeah, I got you, David. I got you. And to Jackson, he may not have been buying it explicitly to elect Trump, but he did buy with the intention of making a free speech platform and unbanning everyone, explicitly Trump. Possible coincidence? Possibly a coincidence. I personally am in favor of having a free speech platform, especially when you see the collusion between the government and old Twitter with who they would demonetize, shadow ban. I don't think they had a good reason to ban Trump, honestly. In fact, that seems more like a political play than letting everybody talk, to let one specific candidate not talk, because it's not like Elon went in. It would be a big problem if Elon went in, unbanned Trump, and then banned Biden, banned Kamala, banned Bernie Sanders, whatever. But that doesn't seem like what he did. Now, I can understand that, but... Okay, a woman tried to citizens arrest Thomas Walter CEO better than Luigi's solution. Okay, sweet, bro. Sweet. Okay. The comment, England rents its stolen rain for eternal usually interest, is poetic, metaphorical, and critical in tone. You're getting some props here, Ogden, by ChatGPT. So stolen rain suggests water resources have been taken unjustly. I'm guessing you're not talking about colonialism. I'm guessing you're talking about privatization of water. So the utilities are privatized. So it's captured, processed, sold back to the people, hence stole. So, okay, I get what you're saying there, I think. Usury is the practice of charging excessive or unethical interest on loans. I think we know that. So like the usury is that like you're collecting interest on loans that people take to buy water, I guess. All right. Well, let me know if that's a good explanation, Agam. I mean, it seems just kind of how utilities work nowadays, but maybe you're critical of that, and I would agree with you, except I just don't know how I would get my water if there weren't giant utilities, like infrastructure. You know what I mean? Like, I'm personally not in the position to be collecting my own rainwater, especially because it doesn't rain in LA. But maybe in England, it'd be easy for everyone to collect their own rainwater. Okay. What else we got here? We got Sean in the Discord. Welcome, Sean. Feel free to jump in if you want. I think we have a chat. Right now, Sean, we are doing a worldview audit. So I'm sort of asking people what their worldviews are, and we're going from there. And I'm trying to put it in terms of the transcendental argument. But we're having kind of an open conversation right now. We have a few people saying some interesting stuff in the YouTube chat. Yeah, right. Okay, so, and then we kind of got talking about Elon Musk. Like, so we had an economics guy in here who presented that he had been banned from the economics Discord for having a heterodox opinion. And so then I started asking what people's worldviews are in terms of that. And we kind of got this sentiment of like capitalism equals stealing, or like billionaires equals stealing. Yeah, so Sean, specifically, we're kind of in the economic realm right now, which is okay, but we can move to any other realm. And I'm just pushing back on that because I hear it all the time, and it's not obviously true to me. So Sean says billionaires are stealing. Fair enough, so we'll keep going into that. So David Palermo says Trump violated Twitter's company rules is why he was banned. Twitter can do that, so can Facebook or any other privately owned company. I agree that they can. It's just a question of whether they are promoting free speech or not by doing that. And so I don't remember exactly what the rule was that Trump violated. I can't imagine it was, I don't know, something egregious, but maybe it was. Maybe it was. Even if people are saying egregious things, I prefer for everybody to speak. And then you battle in the marketplace of ideas, right? So if somebody says something bad and wrong, the answer is not to not let them speak. It's to let other smarter people counter their points with better points. And it should be easy, especially if they're saying something egregiously wrong. Stealing doesn't happen because of capitalism. Stealing happens because humans exist. Regardless of any economic system in place, results in stealing. And I totally agree. And that's something I started with before. It's like, of course, people can abuse the capitalistic system to steal. They don't even have to abuse it. They can just operate within it and steal. But is that reflective of capitalism itself, or is that reflective of human nature? And we have to look at what the systems it's compared to. So if you're comparing it to communism or socialism, well, that's by definition, you must steal in order to institute a communist society. You must take some people's money and redistribute it to other people. Whereas capitalism, at least ideally, which I understand is not how it works in practice most of the time, or all of the time, but at least theoretically, at least ideally, capitalism is about the free exchange of energy and money for products, and it's a free exchange. So you don't buy anything you don't want to buy. You don't give money to people you don't want to give money to, whereas communism is the exact opposite of that. Yeah, that's right. That's right, the martial esotericist. Worldview. Audit. Baptism by fire. Yep, priests can steal. Does that mean that God likes stealing? Of course not. It just means that people are flawed, right? He was banned because of January 6th. I say that was pretty egregious. It depends on, it was egregious on the part of the people that did January 6th. I'm not sure what Trump exactly said to incite January 6th. That was definitely the rhetoric. That's why he got banned. I agree with that. But if you look at the speech he gave that he was banned for, he specifically said, "Do not act violently." So look, am I like some kind of like giant Trump supporter? Like, do I love Donald Trump? No, of course not. I didn't vote for him, but I didn't vote for Kamala either. But I just am critical. I think even unless someone's actively calling for violence, which you'd have to make the argument that Trump was, and maybe he was, especially if you can provide some receipts for that, I'd be interested in seeing them. That would be one thing. But if he's doing anything other than calling for violence, i.e. just expressing his political opinion or even frustration with the system, I think that would violate free speech to take him out of the conversation for that. Again, that doesn't mean he's right. That just means I think it would be a better strategy to argue him based on the facts and the evidence and the logic rather than not let him speak at all, because then that's how you get confusion. That's how you get cult-like adoration. That's how he gets to start his own whatever truth social thing, which probably you would consider more problematic than free speech Twitter. But fair enough. Okay. Let's see. Money is debt created from the void. Yeah, we live in a debt society. I completely agree that money has been it's been separated from value in a way. All of our money supply is based on our insane national debt and just printing it with no backing. So I'm against that, but I don't think that's capitalism. I think that is a form of redistribution of wealth, really. It's a form of socialism. To print money when you need it is a tax on people, especially the poorest people who have cash. So if you're heavily invested in the stock market, which only like the top 10% wealth-wise of people are, then inflation, printing money, that it affects you, but it's not nearly as much as someone who's entirely liquid, whose entire money source is cash. Because when you have $1,000 and the government, say, prints, say the government doubles their money supply, which wouldn't happen, but say they doubled their money supply and you have $1,000 in the bank, which you worked hard all month for, suddenly your $1,000 equals $500. So you've been taxed $500 by the government making money so that they can give you things, which, surprise, surprise, you never get the stuff. You barely ever get the benefit, and you have no money. Okay. I must be honest about my beliefs. It would be a disservice to keep my beliefs in private or obscure by being vague. I like that. Appreciate that. I agree with you, but it is the prerogative of Twitter to interpret what was said by a highly influential person on their platform. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I think that's just a preference of what you want Twitter to be. So I prefer Twitter to be like the Wild West, where individuals, the mass of people, interpret what someone's trying to say, not a few people at the very top interpreting what people are trying to say. Does that make sense? I know this is a religious streaming channel, but there are several indictments you could read about his concerted effort to steal the election behind the scenes. Jan 6 wasn't intended, but convenient. I get that. I understand that for sure, and we can look into that. U.S. debt, 666 gold dollars for every son of Adam since space time. Okay, Oggum's on one. I like it. Welcome to the stream, brother. You're going to like it here. So from the conversation we've had so far, we both believe in God, but the difference between you and I is that you are a Christian while I'm not convinced by Christianity. Good. Okay, now we're getting a worldview. Although I do also believe that Christians are close when they say God is love. Okay, so let's go to martial esotericists because this is the point sort of today's stream is to worldview audit. So, to the esotericist, you believe in God, you're not convinced by the Christian God, but you believe parts of the Christian God are accurate or close to being accurate. So, I would simply ask, which God do you believe in? Is it monotheistic? Do you agree with that part? Do you agree that God is a rational, personal being, a being with agent, or do you think it's more like the Tao or some kind of Buddhist, like Buddha nature, impersonal creator? Yeah. I agree, however, it's owned by Twitter, so they make the rules. Yeah. And I'm not trying to limit a private company's ability to do things. I've heard the argument that Twitter is more than a private company because it's the main public square, so to speak. But even that's a bad analogy because a public square, by definition, is public. Sean says in the Discord here that Einstein believed in a non-personal God, which is quite interesting, but I think runs into problems when we get to the transcendental argument. We'll get into that, hopefully, with the esotericists. So another difference between you and I is that you have come to know God through reason, but I've come to know God through irreason. And by that, I assume you mean like an emotional, personal connection or just some sort of like vague underlying belief that you have. So that's interesting. And I think you can come to knowledge of God through either way. And I think you come through it to both ways, which I think is what I have. David says, I think I've agreed with you more than I ever have today. Awesome, brother. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, I know we always talk about religion, which is so dividing, but that's on purpose. That's what's interesting to talk about, things that divide us. But we would probably get along very closely on a lot of other topics that come more into the realm of like politics, economics. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe not. Maybe not at all, but that's okay. Okay, so to the esotericists, I would say, you've met this God. Let's call him the unknown God. Is that fair? Call him the unknown God through reason, or through irreason, through emotional means or something not explicitly logical. Does that mean there is no logical basis for the existence of the God that you believe in, or does that mean you haven't evaluated that logical basis yet? Because this is important, because so you've met this God through illogical means. Does that mean that he is illogical? Because that could pose a problem. That could pose a serious contradiction. And especially, let's see. Ogum going off. Public square for whisperers. Silver buys you deafening sonic weapons. What are sonic weapons? Like the shoes that make him run so fast? Is that what a sonic weapon is? Yeah, I'd be interested to Sean in the Discord. Einstein believed in this non-personal God, and that is interesting. And I just wonder, I think Christians often unfairly make Einstein a theist, and I think atheists unfairly adopt Einstein as an atheist when it's clear that he was somewhere in between. He's some kind of deist, or he had some spiritual belief. And I think why Einstein came to this like sort of vague deism was that he couldn't deny the fact of fine-tuning as you see it. And that's what a lot of scientists say. And so to me, though, fine-tuning only works if the God is personal, or at least has what they call a telos, like some kind of works with a purpose towards a specific end. And so it seems to me that a non-personal God can't or won't or is unlikely to have a purpose for creation. And this is what we kind of see in the Eastern traditions in Buddhism and stuff, that there's this sort of like mystical, spiritual, like substrates kind of holding things together, and it probably created everything, but it's just something you kind of tap into, but it doesn't have purpose, doesn't have intention, it doesn't move towards any end. It's sort of like an endless looping thing. And I'm curious if that's what people here believe in. Okay, this is good, David. Okay, so, well, we'll get to everybody. So first, because I just saw David, Einstein believed in a God of Spinoza who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the universe. He called himself an agnostic or a religious non-believer, rejecting the idea of a personal God. Okay, so that's interesting. That's really good. So if this God, this unknown God, the God of Spinoza, reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the universe, then we already know a couple things about this God of Spinoza. For one, we know that he's interested in revealing himself. Maybe we don't know that. I'm going to argue that. Maybe you could say he's not interested in that. We just are able to, interpret the laws in order to find him. But it also implies that he desires something harmonious or lawful, right? So a few things about him, like he respects reason or logic or order, right? And harmony. And so those to me seem like things that only a personal agent can really be interested in. Marshall Esoterica, it's precisely because God has broken through my sterile logic and reason that I have come to know him. I'm not saying that God is illogical, but he is beyond human reasoning. And that makes sense. And then also, and how did this God break through and shatter my reason? It was through love. I pulled from the depths of my despair and nihilism. And that's great. I think that's awesome. That's great. But if God is impersonal, then why? So this is a good question. Can an impersonal thing love you? Can a thing with no mind, no rational mind, and no heart, can it actually love you enough to pull you out of that? To me, love is a relational thing between two persons. So if God pulled you out of nihilism through love, that to me would speak to his personhood. To Sean, we got Sean in the Discord. He says, does God need love? I'm going to say not in the way that that's formulated. I'm going to say God is love. God is the highest expression of love, and God needs nothing. But this is a really interesting point, right? So the Unitarian God of, say, Islam is also supposed to embody like the highest perfection of love, right? But how do you do that? Well, love is a relationship between an object and a subject, right? So I love something. I love my wife, right? My wife loves me. If you have a simple Unitarian God, then he would need creation in order to experience relational love instead of just selfish love, like just pure love for yourself, right? That's why the Trinity is so important for explaining how God is the fullness of love, because within the Trinity, which is God, you have subject, object, and they call it sometimes I've heard it formulated as God the Father is the lover, God the Son is the beloved, and the Holy Spirit is the love that they share. Now, if you just have one extremely simplistic, say you just have a God the Father, then without other things, without creation, he has no ability to express relational love, true love. And that's part of the reason the Trinity is so important and why it makes sense. Okay. Let me begin my confession by saying I was a black pillar. Yeah, I think we've all been through that. And it was because I was operating on an atheistic, materialistic paradigm. And yeah, I do think the logical ends of that sort of paradigm, the ultra materialistic, the ultra atheistic, it leads to a form of nihilism, because you can't get around certain things. Like, for instance, there is no higher power expressing will and love for me. Therefore, I live in a cold, random, disjointed, disordered universe. That is a scary place to be. And fortunately, you don't have to be there. And actually, logically, it defeats itself. Because if you live in a cold, unfeeling, unthinking, disordered, disunified universe, that would mean that your brain comes from that very same universe. It's built of the exact same building blocks. It is in itself also disunified, disordered, unfeeling, unthinking. Now you go, well, no, it's not, because I'm thinking. But you only think that you're thinking, right? Especially in that universe where there's no guarantee that logic is valid or objective, that morality is objective. That's what the transcendental argument, which we're looking at here, speaks to. So I'll bring up Jay's list here. So if none, so self, time and space, unity and diversity, identity over time, causation, teleology, laws of logic, abstract concepts, meaning, and more, if none of those things are grounded in a divine mind, in like a mind that encapsulates the whole universe, then all these things are purely subjective. And what does that leave you? Well, you could either believe in them or not. That's extremely nihilistic. If you're at the point where you could either, maybe I believe in space and time, but maybe it's not real, well, then where are you, brother? You're lost at sea. That's what I think. So I understand. I definitely get how you got from atheist and materialist paradigm to a more unified, proper, sensical, sort of inspiring, hope-inducing paradigm of like, there is a God. Now I don't know who he is, but we still have to answer the question, is this God personal? And if he's not personal, then you're still stuck in that paradigm because, oh, well, maybe God does love me, or maybe he doesn't. Or maybe God, maybe God does have a plan for everything, or maybe he doesn't. And then you're just swimming in these deep waters of maybe this, maybe that. And, it's not more correct to say, I don't know about some of these topics. For instance, if you were asked on a math test for an answer and you wrote, I don't know, you equally don't get the points as if you answer the wrong, if you give the wrong answer. You know what I mean? You still get 0 out of 10 or whatever. You can say, I don't know, and leave it at that. Saying I don't know is not being lost. It's not being, well, but almost technically, by definition, it is being lost, because being lost is not knowing where you are. Being lost is when you don't know which direction to go to take you forward, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right that you can do that. You could be happy with being lost, or with being, let me say a little less like aggressively. I'm not trying to like incite anger on you guys. I'm just saying, if you don't have ground to stand on. So these transcendental categories are called. These are things that are preconditions for us to know anything. They're preconditions for us to have a logical worldview. Now, if you just say these things exist, but they're brute facts, they just exist out there, and I think most of us would acknowledge that the self exists, time and space exists, identity over time is real, causation is a real thing, teleology, in other terms, like purpose, so things working towards a purpose are real, but you say they're not grounded in anything, then you're not standing on any ground. If you ground all these things in a personal God, though, then you're at least standing on that ground from which you can make decisions and move forward and try to understand these categories at a deeper level. So it's not that you're necessarily lost. You're just not. There's a absolutely excellent verse in the Bible, which we will pull up because I like to do that any moment I can. Matthew 7:24 through 27. I wish I had this like encyclopedic knowledge of where every verse is. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how my brain works. So I still have to like look up the specific verse on ChatGPT, but then we actually go to it so that you know I'm not bullshitting. Okay, so this is a really incredible part too, which we don't have to get into per se. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. So this is what we're talking about. Focus on this image here. Building your house on a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. Now, to complete the metaphor, like to explain the metaphor a little bit, the rain coming down, this is like chaos, like kind of the rain is like this kind of life-giving thing, but it also brings some sort of level of like, there's a little bit of darkness, there's a little bit of chaos and unsureness. Is it going to stop? Is it going to be worse? Is there going to be lightning and thunder, whatever? And the floods came. This is the chaos. Remember, water always is symbolic of chaos, right? So then the floods is the chaos coming from up above you, from below you. You could call it from, the evil one, or you could call it from nature, or from whatever. So you got chaos coming from above, chaos coming from the bottom, and then the winds is just the constant like moving of the air on the side. So you're getting it from all angles, and you're trying to build your house, which is, yourself, your worldview, your belief. And if you build it on something solid, something unmovable, like a rock, then the house will stand in the face of all this chaos. You will survive these chaotic events. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And so think about what sand is. Sand is rocks, right? Sand is rocks. There's not much difference between a grain of sand and a big rock. The difference is sand is not connected together. It's not unified. By definition, it's like the quintessential multiplicity connected by no unity. It moves. It gets washed away by the waters of chaos and the literal waters. And so you can either build your worldview on something multiplicitous and wishy-washy and flaky, and that just pushes, when like wind comes, it just gets pushed away. You can build your house on sand. Or you can build your house on something connected and solid and strong like a rock. And that's kind of what we're talking about here with the transcendental argument. If you just accept all these things to be true with no grounding, then you're building a house on sand, on a multiplicity of different unconnected ideas or whatever, preconditions. Now, if you ground them in something like a personal being, God, then that would be to turn the sand to like unify it, connect it into one more steady rock. Okay, let's go to the chat. Einstein's love of nuclear nihilism will be swept away like Venus by the sun with mankind. Love it, brother. Love it. Keep spitting. Keep spitting. David Palermo, I'd be happy to say God exists, provided I had evidence. Until then, I don't know. Fair enough. Esotericist, God's love is one that improves the human spirit, which cultivates heroic virtues. It is not one of impotence and hedonism. I completely agree. But again, you're especially implying that he's a personal agent because he has an interest, right? He has an interest in you not being impotent and hedonistic. That means he has a will. He has a desire for you. And then Ogum says YouTube operates on apartheid, where the word Venus is verboten. It seems. It seems like you got the word Venus through. I'd be surprised if it's verboten, but fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. So, okay, we got some more. I don't know if fairies exist because I don't have evidence, so I don't know. Okay. We can think about that. Well, I would say I think God loves me, but his love is not this wholesome love that is fed to us through pop culture. His love is one that demands strength, vitality, and action. Again, yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Just we have to think about what that actually means. That, to me, especially implies a personhood to God. Okay, gotta run. Great talking to you, David. Thanks for joining. Photographing a millionaire's home. Always fun to chat. Until next time, have a great afternoon. You too, brother. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for stopping through. Good luck with your photo shoot. That sounds fun. Yeah, and make sure you ask him if he's stealing. He'll love that. He'll love that. The Soviets collected sand beyond Mars in the 70s. I would be very surprised about that. If that's true, then I got to do a lot of rethinking about my world history, my space aeronautics history. Okay. Cool. Okay. So, yeah, let me know, Esotericist. Is this making sense why God has to be personal given the qualities you're ascribing to him? Which I agree with you, by the way. I think those qualities are true. I do think that does imply a personhood.
There's one point where Barlium makes the argument, and he later contradicts himself, but there's one point in the dialogue where Barlium says, oh, well, you don't actually know God directly, you just know created effects. And Palamas says, okay, well then if we're always only knowing created effects, then we never actually know if we're knowing God's mercy, God's love, God's justice, or any. It's just created effects. Yeah. So we never know God himself, which undercuts the incarnation, because it's so stupid.
Yeah, it is. I don't understand how, I've heard you debate Thomas about this. How could anybody say that the Transfiguration was created grace? I don't understand that.
Thus the slow boy nature of their existence. I mean, how do you say it's just ridiculous?
Absurd, man.
Well, that's how they rescue the system. They will go anywhere to rescue the system because they know if they can see that it's not, then pretty much over for Thomism.
Okay. One more question, Jay, and I'm gonna move on. Let
Sure.
somebody else talk.
Sure.
So I was listening to your Sam Harris critique the other day, and he kept talking about, Sam Harris keeps bringing up this whole there's a brute facts. There's just a brute fact.
Right.
This is a brute fact.
Right.
And you say that there's no brute fact.
Right.
Now I'm just trying to work this out in my head. So, okay, if I assume there's a self, okay, and I say that's a brute fact, and of course you would say it's not, right? It's not a brute fact to say that I'm a self, I'm an individual, some kind of conscious being of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
That's not self-evident, or is it not? Or is it?
Well, no, I mean,
my question is, how is it not? Like, if I am able to empirical sense data, like if I go touch a chair and I can feel the wood and I can look at the legs, I'm seeing with my eyes. How is that not saying that I'm empirically sense dating this object? So therefore, the self has to be a brute fact. Like, I don't.
Because there's no such, because you're assuming all of these things that have not yet been proven. So remember, a brute fact is.
Okay, I like it, Esotericist. This is good. This is exactly what we're looking for. So, yep, you agree there is a personhood to God, I think, is what you're responding there. And another difference between us is that you argue from the transcendental argument, which I will, but I argue from the position which states that the God of the gaps fallacy is not a real fallacy. And you're going to explain that. And I'd love to hear that, because I'm critical of the God of the gaps, of any God of the gaps argument. They do seem fallacious to me, but I'm really interested how you explain them, and that would be great. So quickly for people, what God of the gaps is essentially that if we don't know how it works, therefore God, right? So I can't explain what happened before the Big Bang, therefore God did it. And this is not a good way for Christians typically to argue, unless esotericists can explain to us why it is, because it is defeated any time a scientific discovery is made, which is not a position we want to be in. And there's other ways to argue that are much stronger that aren't defeated by advancements in science. So, for instance, if science did explain that there were some kind of like physical nature or something behind the Big Bang, then they would have, given the way I set up the argument, they would have the right to say, well, God can't be real because we explained that thing that you used to say that God is real, right? So it's something like that. Usually it's fallacious, but I'm interested. Let me, I'll play this for you guys, and I'm going to run to the bathroom. I'll be right back.
I can see it, though. Like,
that's begging the question. Hold on. Let's take some examples, and Father Deacon's really good on this too, so I'll let him speak in a second. But I mean, you're assuming that you're seeing something like this occur. So you are receiving sense data impressions from an external object, but this event itself does not tell you that there's a meaningful external world with this meaningful object that is imprinting causally this sense data upon you. You're just assuming that there's an event occurring, there's a sense data occurring, and you are interpreting it as the chair in the external world that is causing that. That's an invalid leap that you can't justify.
Okay, well, how does that not lead to like this, like, you know, Buddhist, Hindu, like everything's an illusion?
No, I'm not. You're confusing. You're confusing the argument.
The fundamental premise of my argument is that it's not that there are gaps and God exists within those gaps, but it's precisely because there are gaps that there exists a God. Okay, I like that. I think we can build off of that, and I think that's valid. So, let me try to get my head around this one. Okay, so specifically, there will always be gaps and disjunctions between our human systems of knowledge and reasoning and reality itself due to its infinite complexity. So I agree with that. I think the fractal nature of science and observation and the infinite complexity that we seem to, like, every time we learn something new in science, there's like 10 more avenues of exploration. That to me also suggests that the grounding of reality is this infinitely complex, I think it has to be a mind, especially considering usually laws of nature are implied or discovered, say, by science. And so how do you have laws without a lawgiver? So I think that's a good argument. And yeah, I think it's fair to point to the ever-increasing complexity, the infinite sort of complexity of nature and the laws of nature to say that there is a God. I agree with that. And technically, I like that you're kind of repurposing the term God of the gaps. Technically, that's not really a God of the gaps argument. That's more like a fine-tuning argument or something more valid. So, but I like how you're bringing those two things in together. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that's great. Yeah, right. So you're not placing God in the gaps. You're saying God is the explanation for there being these gaps. That if everything were subjective and then we created reality from within our own brains, from within our own subjective experience, then there would be nothing outside of our subjective experience that we could discover, because we created everything. So how would we create something that we have no cognizance of, right? That makes sense. Yeah, reality is infinitely complex, and an infinitely complex reality can only come from an infinitely complex being. And I totally agree. I completely agree with that. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And it's almost like a cosmological argument, or I don't know. It's that's a good one. I'm gonna see if I can find this video. When I talk about the fractal nature of reality, I think that's a really cool way to look at nature and look at reality. So fractal mountain zoom. Okay. This might be the best way. So imagine this is like a mountain in nature. Although this is not really what I thought it was going to be. Yeah, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Okay, this is even better, even though it's not. So you know how we have the picture, we have like a big mountain. Let me do this. Okay, so here, this is a good example. Okay, so you have a mountain here, right? This is one unified thing. You look at this and you go, that's a mountain. And now imagine you zoom in. You zoom in on a specific peak. So like this peak here, this one here. You get really close to it, and that looks like its own little mountain, right? And then you zoom in further and further, you get to one little crag, and that also looks like its own little mountain. And you zoom in and in and in, and then you get to a single rock, and that itself resembles the shape of the whole mountain. And you keep zooming, and you do this all the way down to the atomic level, and you zoom all the way out to the level of the whole Earth. And I think reality is sort of structured like a mountain, but there's this sort of like infinite zooming in and zooming out that we can do on any particular thing in nature, which suggests this infinitely complex reality that we live in. And I don't know, maybe that's just silly. Maybe that's just high guy thinking. To Jackson W, isn't that just observer bias? Oh shoot, that was from a long time ago. I don't remember what that was in relation to. But you're welcome to come join the chat, Jackson, if you like. And you're welcome to remind me of what the observer bias is that we were talking about. Yeah, so again, it's like, yeah, the beauty of nature right there, and the genius of the mind of God to create nature in such a way. And it does seem absolutely correct. So, yeah, this is another good point. Back to the transcendental categories. If these things are just brute facts, i.e. they just exist, they're the sand that you're building your house on, this is not complex at all. All these things, that's certainly not infinitely complex. Sort of these things being the basis of reality. They're actually quite logical. They're quite simple. They have a direct meaning. So how do, 12, there's probably more, but like 12 simple premises or ideas lead to the infinite complexity of nature? Maybe they do, but it's not obvious that would be the case. You would actually think that if nature were starting from a grounding that was this simple, that anything that came out of that would have to be that simple or less, or that simple or more simple, I guess. Like, for instance, so if I'm trying to make a sentence out of like 5 letters, like I only have A, B, H, J, and I, then there's really only so many sentences I can make, right? But if you observe me using those, 5 letters to make a sentence, then it implies that there's intellect, like, using those base units to like make something. But also it could mean, and in this case it does mean, that I actually have the full corpus of the 26 letters of the alphabet. I think there's 26, right? I'm not sure. So just because you observe, like in this case, 10 letters that make up a sentence doesn't mean these are all the letters. And so to get an infinitely complex system of nature, to me, I do think you would also need an infinitely complex creator of nature. So yeah. Does God need love? Yeah, we answered Sean's question. I think, does God need love? Allah needs love, or he at least needs creation in order to love. The triune God, the God of the Bible, the Trinity, does not need creation in order to have love. He has the fullness of love from all of time, before the beginning of time, infinitely. So that's a fun, important topic. And I do wish I remember what Jackson was calling observer bias, but I don't. So maybe we'll continue with Jay Dyer a little bit.
Empiricist starting point. In other words, you want to be an empiricist. You want to. That's what you're. See, a lot of people don't understand that when you have this view, you got to take the empiricist system as a whole. You can't make these.
Furthermore, way to obtain knowledge or learn about the external world without assumptions.
Sure.
And so why could they not reverse that on us and say, well, how do you know?
This,
blah, 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 blah,
bro, right. So all we're doing is showing that their empiricist starting point doesn't work. I'm not saying that there's no commonality between these events. There is. But I don't have the problem because I don't have their worldview. This is a problem for their worldview.
Right.
So they can't turn it on us because I would just say, well, I'm not an empiricist. So the problems aren't a problem for me because I believe in all these categories and metaphysical principles. You are saying that you don't believe in all these metaphysical things and these conclusions. You're saying that you can't validate these metaphysical claims, and then you're using all these metaphysical claims to even make a claim that there is a, quote, meaningful sense data impression. You can't.
Okay.
That's the point.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And remember what knowledge, kind of in the traditional sense, actually is. It's not just having a correct belief, a true belief, but having the justification for it.
Yeah.
So
we can justify it and they can't.
No.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean, if they just say, "Oh, because I have these," how do I actually determine that my belief is true? In other words, what are my right reasons? Oh, just these a set of further unjustified assumptions that I've just made up or that I can't defend. Like, well, how is that a justification? And if
did you guys?
Yeah. So you have abandoned your vulgar materialism and empiricism. There are higher truths out there, and I think that's great. That's a noble effort, and it takes a level of humility, right? Because ultimately, I know people don't want to see it this way. This is not how the atheist formulates it in his own brain. But the rejection of a higher power, a presiding principle over you, is a radical form of an expression of your sovereignty over your own life. Like, you have complete freedom to do or think or say whatever you want because there's no ultimate arbiter of what's true, at least in the conceptual world. Now, I think to be fair to them, they would say, well, I can't do whatever I want because I live in a society. And so I'm regulated, I'm mediated by the other people in the society. I have to be kind to them and good to them and take care of them and, operate reasonably within the society. But that ignores the point that a society is just made up of a multiplicity of subjective views. So if the society isn't bound by this higher power, this presiding power that dictates, laws and behaviors and things like that, then it falls into disunity because everybody gets to have their equally valid subjective view. And just because you did the right thing and followed the law written on your heart by saying I should be nice and kind and good to people, if someone else decides not to do that, they're not actually wrong. So that's where that's the problem with materialism. That's why it affords people this, it's attractive to people because it gives you freedom, but that freedom is not proper and it's not helpful on the final determination. What's up, Nubanon? Welcome, brother. Welcome. We're having a good one today. So, I would say it's a useful paradigm when I am tackling physical problems or doing experiments, but I don't base my worldview on it. Yeah, exactly. And there's like we were talking about with the fractal nature of reality, it's like it's proper to focus on to use the correct like magnification for your focus. So if I'm doing something super physical, like I'm doing my taxes, it's not useful for me to say to be like, well, God exists and he's the final judge of me and the final arbiter, therefore taxes are not important because the entire thing is about my salvation and the battle of good versus evil. And it's like, well, yes, the ultimate picture is about salvation and the battle of good versus evil. But we're also explicitly told to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. And in this paradigm, in this situation, the taxes are Caesar's. And so I can limit my view, I can magnify in on the material, the money, in order to live a more integrated life. And so like be properly ordered at the material level, and I'll be properly ordered at the, spiritual, theological level, and there are baser desires as well. Like for instance, the fact that you need to eat every now and again, stuff like that. So, here it would be important to notice the difference between coherence theory versus foundationalism. Your favorite topic. So that's interesting. You want to do that? We can do that. Do you want to give your explanation of coherence theory and foundationalism? Or we can watch a video, or I can ask ChatGPT and we can get into it, or I can just try to basically guess what those things are. If I had to guess, first off, I would say coherence theory is that as long as the sort of as long as the multiplicity of transcendental categories are coherent, they don't need a basis or something. They don't need like a grounding. Whereas I'm guessing foundationalism would be that there is a genuine foundation or a grounding for transcendental categories. Also, a good critique against physicalist worldviews is how they fall into empiricist problems. Like physical things are those that can be perceived through the senses, and thus physicalism encounters the problems of Hume. Again, we might need some explanation or unpacking of that, but there are genuine empiricist problems. Like, for instance, you cannot empirically prove that your brain faculties are valid, are logical. So it could be this sort of like illusion that logic is real. That's not possible to be empirically disproved or proved. But in a theistic paradigm, specifically a Christian theistic paradigm, it's obvious that logic is valid because the creator of the universe gave us logic, created us in his image, which is to be rational and logical, and he created us towards a specific end, one end of which is to perceive truth and know truth. Now that works in the Christian paradigm. It does not work on the physicalist paradigm. There's nothing guaranteeing that thoughts and reason and logic are at all like consistent or coherent without the grounding for those thoughts. That's an epistemology thing, right? That makes sense. Oh, it's coherence theory is the beliefs that can only be justified by other beliefs. Foundational is when a belief is justified through experience. Okay, that makes sense. Is it a sign of health to be integrated into an unhealthy society? Especially when the society espouses hedonism and impotence, it is no coincidence that materialism leads to hedonism at best and eugenics and Darwinism at worst. I completely agree. And so this is another reason that having a house built on rock rather than a house built on sand is so important, because when you find yourself, as we do right now, in a time, in a culture which espouses or promotes disjointed, disunified, hedonistic pleasures, if everything is according to the subjective will of the society, then you would actually be right to lean into hedonism and over sexualization and all these things that the culture clearly agrees with, but as a theist or a Christian, you have a good reason to stand against. And I think you do have a good reason to stand against those things. And in fact, I can't see how societal change even would happen unless there was some sort of presiding, overriding, overarching rule or set of rules, or, just law. Like, if there is a standard to which we're meant to live up to. That seems to be how society changes. That's how we get the abolitionist movement in the 19th century. So materialism doesn't even believe in the notion of romance. Yeah, spirit of adventure and discovery and love. Yeah, I think they say they believe in it, but they have no grounding for it. Again, it's kind of like the problem of when I say that the atheist has no grounding for morality, I'm not saying that atheists aren't moral people. They obviously are. There's some very good people that charity, and they're loving, and they're good to their friends and kind to people and compassionate. It's just that they don't know where that comes from, and they have no justification for that action. No ultimate justification for it. And it's the exact same thing that you're saying right here with the spirit of adventure and discovery and love. And, they could come up with some sort of genetic thing, but the problem with that is if you're assuming that your logic and your reason, which leads you to the argument that, like, these things can be born from a biological history, you can't even trust the brain faculties, the thinking faculties that got you to that conclusion. So I agree that it's hard, it's impossible for them to incorporate that into their worldview. Okay, so to Numenon. So basically, physicalist worldviews come from an empiricist epistemology where everything is known through the senses, right? Thus, they fall into Hume's problem because there are many things you must believe in that aren't in our sense data. That's exactly right. That's exactly what the transcendental categories are meant to point out to people. You must believe in the laws of logic, and yet we have no sense data to confirm them. So the empiricist either has to not believe, which nobody professes that the laws of logic are invalid. So you either have to not believe in them, or you have to believe in them irrationally, without reason, without grounding. And that is the exact opposite of what empiricism is. Like, empiricism claims to only believe things that they have reason for. But by saying that, they must accept things that they don't have reason for if they want to preclude God. Because the only way to explain, I've not heard of an explanation for the grounding for the transcendental categories that does not include God. So yeah, there's like a self-defeating nature of the empiricist claim for sure. Yep, the future causation, even, space and time, time, arguably you experience with your senses, and space you probably do, but time you don't really. Laws of logic, there was a whole list before. And that is where you get the stupidity of atheists saying numbers don't exist. Yeah, so abstract objects like numbers. Yeah, if you want to say that numbers have no grounding, then you have to say they're not real. They're created by us, or, really, that's what they have to say. And if they're not created by us, they're not purely a subjective, term or whatever it is. If you want to say they're not created by us, they must be objective. They must exist out in the world. And how do numbers exist except for in a mind? Therefore, the fact that numbers objectively exist implies a divine mind to hold things like numbers. So, yeah, I agree. I think a lot of atheists will deny the existence of abstract objects, or at least they'll do a little cognitive dissonance thing where they say they exist and they say that we can use them, and they say we discover mathematical laws instead of invent them. But if you ask them, well, discover them from where, they can't say anything without referencing some larger presiding higher power, I think. The reason why the coherence distinction is vital is how different belief systems can explain the same thing in different ways. Thus, you need a way to delineate between them, and by seeing which ones self-contradict. Like both solipsism and the assumption of an external world equally explain our senses. So how do you decide between them? By seeing which belief system self-contradicts, right? Yeah, and the self-contradiction inherent in solipsism is that I can't make any objective truth claim, yet I'm making the objective truth claim that solipsism is real, right? So, yeah, you cannot be a true solipsist. It's self-defeating, self-contradicting. And yes, let's hear a steelman. That's great. Let's steelman the atheist position. And atheists might say it's not that numbers don't exist. They don't exist in reality, but they exist as useful cognitive tools to describe the real phenomenon. And that's a good steelman. I think that is what they say. And I guess the counterpoint would be, how do they exist? Which, like you said, they discovered or created. That could be a good way to further the conversation. My direct counter to that steelman, though, is that, okay, fine. They say that I grant you that numbers don't exist, but they exist as a cognitive tool for us to describe real phenomena. So does that mean that before human beings existed, before cognitive agents who could recognize numbers existed, that means that 7 did not exist? Imagine the beginning of the planet, and there are the first plants popping up out of the molten core, whatever came first, and there's 7 of them. Does that position say that there actually aren't 7 plants? That 7 doesn't exist? That there's no, that if humans were not around, 2 plus 2 could equal 5 or 8 or 11 or anything like that? I think the obvious answer is that no. I mean, 7 exists long before humans. It's out there. So, like, the real phenomena that it's describing is the actual number existing in nature, right? And then Numenon says, yeah, and how within solipsism there's usually a possibility that the illusion is making your brain commit reasoning mistakes every time you reason, and thus that belief system can't even reason. And yeah, that's of course true. Especially within solipsism, even within straight like physicalism or naturalism, that problem is presented, because if your brain was simply evolved for the survival of the fittest, it's not the survival of the truthiest. It's not the survival of the, perceiving reality accurately. It's survival of the fittest. So if it were more fit for you to not, for you to be illogical than logical or something like that, then that's a perfectly valid way for humans to evolve. And that could be the exact situation we're in right now. But if physicalism is not true, this is all epistemology, like how we know things at all. Naturalism, solipsism, they're self-defeating, because if they're true, then you can't know they're true, right? That's essentially what it boils down to. Sorry that I'm all over the place. No worries. I am too. That's what the stream is all about. This is literally my favorite topic. To elaborate on the empiricism versus Christianity, maybe you could ask ChatGPT on divine constitutionalism versus empiricism in epistemology. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Divine, what is it? Constitutionalism versus empiricism in epistemology. So the empiricist epistemological view, the theory that all knowledge is primarily derived from sense experience, what we see, hear, touch, etc. Key features are that knowledge comes after experience. Truth is discovered by observing the world and testing hypotheses. But you already see the self-contradiction, right? If truth is discovered after you apply your sense data, then in what way does knowledge come from experience? So like, all you're saying here is that the knowledge could be false, like that there is no true knowledge, that like there's nothing objectively true, because it's just what you experience, what you've discovered, becomes true. Oh, divine conceptualism. Okay, we'll do that as well. Okay, so the summary: we are born as a tabula rasa, blank slate. Knowledge is written into us by what we observe and experience. It's fine. It just doesn't seem right. And then we will go through this just because it's a thing, apparently. This likely refers to the idea that truth and knowledge are embedded into reality by divine decree or constitution, meaning knowledge is pre-structured, divinely ordained, or revealed, not discovered empirically. I think the part of the revelation could be empirical discovery for sure. But I also agree that knowledge is part of the created order. It's not just built from sensory experience, but from an inherent structure or revelation established by God. And think about this. If this were not the case, then what would there be to discover? If there's not some underlying structure of true things, then you're not discovering anything. You're creating everything. Truth is absolute. Totally agree, because it reflects the mind or will of a divine being. Furthermore, if truth is not absolute, then it doesn't exist. If it's subjective, then two like countervailing truths are equally accurate, and that's just totally illogical. That makes no sense to live in that world. Yeah. I love ChatGPT when it's used by smart guys like you all. Yeah, I mean, we try our best, but I wouldn't say that per se. But I hate that ChatGPT is used by people who want answers to test questions. Totally true. Nubanon, you make very good points, and I'm impressed by both your depths of knowledge. This confidence is not without justification. Unfortunately, part of being somewhat knowledgeable or whatever is the knowledge of the importance of humility. So I still can't accept your I will thank you for your compliments and appreciate it and take it for what it's worth, knowing that I am so far below what I need to be, what I should be, what I will be. Okay, let's try conceptual. Now do divine conceptualism, please. Okay, it's a view that abstract objects like numbers, propositions, logic, and universals exist as concepts in the mind of God. It's a theistic alternative to Platonism and nominalism, particularly concerned with the existence and grounding of non-empirical truths. Totally. I mean, this is the crux of the transcendental argument. How do we ground these things, which we all believe are true, we all use as if they're true? Nobody really denies that the laws of logic are, objective and independent of human reasoning, like an individual's subjective experience. How can you ground these things? You have to ground them in God, I think. You have to ground them in a personal, divine mind that resides over all of reality. That's the only way that it can exist throughout all of reality, throughout all of time, independent of whether humans observe them or not. Okay. So in simple terms, abstract truths exist because God thinks them. They're not independent, like in Platonism, or made up as in nominalism, but eternally real within the mind of God. Grounding knowledge, truths like 2 + 2 = 4, or a thing cannot be both A and not A, are not discovered by sensory experience, right? Because this is always true whether there are observers or not. So imagine there are no humans on Earth, and there's 2 rocks sitting on the ground, and 2 more rocks fall out of the sky. You have 4 rocks. Doesn't matter if I'm there to look at them or count them or whatever. 2 + 2 = 4. And this is always true. The laws of logic, law of non-contradiction, law of identity, law of excluded middle. It doesn't matter if I'm around or anyone's around to observe them or put language to them. These things are eternally true. So they're not invented by humans, which constructs them, but they're a part of God's eternal rational nature. And the justification for why we can observe them is that we're made in the image of that rational God. Okay, so we know some truths, logic and math, a priori, not through experience, but by reason. And divine conceptualism offers a metaphysical explanation for why these truths are real and accessible. They are eternally present in the divine mind. Humans can grasp them imperfectly because we participate in that rational mind. Cool. And this is the general, even though the atheist will not admit it, this is the general belief of the atheist. When you bring up the transcendental argument, the transcendental categories, they say, well, they just exist. They're just out there. They're brute facts. But I'll point us back to building your house on sand rather than rock. So if you have a laundry list of brute facts which have no explanation and no grounding and just are, they just exist, then you're building your worldview on this multiplicitous, separate, movable, sand-like structure. Whereas if you say God, one single, simple, divine thing, is the grounding and the purpose for all the other multiplicity of transcendental categories and arguments and things like that, then you can still have the sand, but now it's grounded. Now it's like, it's firm. It's like when sand coalesces over billions of years into a single rock. That's what we have, God versus the brute facts. Yeah, it maintains objectivity and necessity, and I do think the personhood is important. So, okay. So the idea is that divine conceptualism escapes the problems of empiricism, and thus your worldview will self-contradict without it. Yeah, like under empiricism, you can't have any knowledge of the future as it isn't in your senses. But under divine conceptualism, you can receive knowledge about the future because God allows you to access His mind. Yeah, I would largely agree with that. I think to strongman the atheist point, they would, or to steelman the atheist point, they would say, well, nobody really knows about the future or something like that. Or they would say, I can make inferences about the future based on my sensory experience of the past. So that's how they would get around that. But I tend to agree with you. Atheistic Platonism is the strongest atheistic position for sure. You don't think it can account for why the world is structured such that human beings aren't prevented from reasoning. Under atheistic Platonism, maybe that's true or something, but there's no reason that that's true. There's no like solid. It's just it either could be or it could not. The Platonic realm could either exist or it could not. And another way of saying that is like if the Platonic realm is the highest like plane of existence, then what guarantees our participation in that plane? What guarantees our ability to even interact with that plane effectively, reasonably, rationally, etc.? And I don't know. Okay. I must warn you, there's a dangerous opponent out there for you, Mr. Ramblings. His name is Monkey Boy, and he's an atheist, and he has fought theists who have used the transcendental argument. I am going to look him up right now. And he's debated presuppositionalists. Okay, cool. Let's look him up because that's really interesting. Let's see what his approach is, because I've not yet heard a convincing takedown of the transcendental arguments. Unless he's just going to say they're brute facts, which can work for the atheist, but it is chaos. Let's see, how do we find this guy? You said he debated Darth Dawkins? Let me go to Monkey Boy's channel. Okay.
Into a respective cult, it is very difficult for them to emotionally detach themselves, because if they begin to consider...
All right, let's read our comments real quick. Also, if you can't know the future at all, then you can't know that you'll be able to reason in 5 seconds. Yeah, so you have to presume that there's coherence between the future and the past, or, permanence. Okay, so also check out how humor proved that you can't know at all what the future will be like, appealing to the past without assuming that the future will resemble it. Monkey Boy is a part of Jack Angstreet's group. They're probably the best intellectual atheists on YouTube. Well, I'm excited. That's good. We'll see if they can actually present something that we can talk about and challenges these ideas.
That there is a true defeater for Islam, then they have to conclude that their parents, their relatives, their brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, ancestors, grandparents, their culture, their nationality, when they come from Islamic countries typically, but not always, right? That all these people are wrong.
Wait, could you not to cut you off or anything, but like, would you
What is your
want
username? What is your username? What is your username? If you don't identify yourself, you're not speaking.
It was Fleur.
It was not me. It was Foxy.
Okay, so this never fails to happen. Maybe today or tomorrow it will fail to happen, but it never fails to happen that Muslims, without fail, in my experience, they just go into bickering mode, where they just become deceptive. This is what they do. Same things with the atheists.
I'm an atheist.
I was a bickering.
So let's see. Okay, so you're an atheist. Let's see how long it takes you to resort to deception. Right? Let's see. Ready, folks? Somebody start the clock. Tell me why you're an atheist.
There we go. Sign it up.
I just affirm the not God worldview.
Okay. Tell me why that's true.
Because God doesn't exist.
Okay, what is your username? If you do not answer me in 5 seconds, you're out of the conversation. Okay, you're out. Okay? See, it took...
I mean, so this is Darth Dawkins is kind of annoying here the way he's framing this, but I mean, he made a point, and the guy said, I don't, and I know that's not Monkey Boy responding, so we'll get to that, but the guy said, tell me why atheism is true. Or so tell me what your worldview is. He says, I'm an atheist. What does that mean? He says, I affirm the worldview that God does not exist. Oh, why do you affirm the worldview that God does not exist? What is that worldview based on? And he says, God does not exist. So totally circular. That guy did not live up to the challenge. I do think Darth Dawkins is a little... He kind of reminds me of real Dawkins in a way so far, but anyway, we'll give him a chance here.
Less than a minute to be deceptive, right then and there. Okay?
Actually, it's like 18 seconds, but
Yeah, less than a minute. So when you talk to, I'm an atheist. Oh, okay. So tell me why you're an atheist. Atheism, in the English language, refers to that there is no creator, there's no God. But atheists lie, and they try to bastardize the standard English meaning and saying, atheism is just an autobiographical statement about my psychology. I'm just absent a positive belief. Okay? They're simply trying to misrepresent their atheism because they can't defend their atheism. So they have to pervert the standard meaning of atheism from being propositional that there is no creator to golly gee shucks, I'm just unconvinced that there's a God, and that I'm unconvinced that there's a Loch Ness monster.
Wait, I don't understand why we're like committed to that definition, right? I'm not like a normative realist about like lexicon.
What is your username?
My username is Joseph, but when we appeal to definitions, all a definition is for some expression is some corresponding mental content that the agent expresses or conveys.
You can stop with the sophistry.
Wait, what species of sophistry?
Listen to me. If you overtalk me, I will server mute you and you will be out of the conversation. Do you understand the rules?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I was debating these issues when you were still playing with your Legos. Okay. Now, you want to play this little definitional game that words are polysemous. Okay. Words are to be understood in the way people use them. Okay. Fine. That's fine under certain context. But the fact of the matter is this. I'm going to ask you a question. Now, if you are evasive, you're going to be out of the conversation. Do you understand? I don't have to agree with you, but you must not be evasive. Now, is there a single word in the English language that is used throughout the entire English world that designates those who deny the existence of God?
Penis.
Well, I'm not. I wouldn't know.
I mean, that's a little. It's atheist. That's what it is. I'm okay with people saying they're agnostic. I also, I don't so far like Darth Dawkins all that much. The way he's talking, I've been debating since you were playing with your Legos. It's like, okay, that's kind of an ad hominem. Literally, you're saying his point isn't valid because you've been doing it longer. It makes no sense. But anyway. This is a good point, that oftentimes what atheists will say is, oh, I'm an atheist simply because I lack a belief in God. I make no positive claim about objective reality. I just lack this belief. Okay, well, call yourself an agnostic then, because that's what you are. An atheist does have a normative meaning in the English language, and it means the denial of God, the denial of the creator of the universe. And so I echo Darth Dawkins' frustration here when people sort of abuse and change language to mean what it doesn't mean in order to make it harder to make a point against what they actually do believe in. Okay, so denying knowledge of the future is self-refuting. Empiricism denies knowledge about the future, yeah. Physicalism is an empiricist worldview, thus physicalism is self-refuting. Yeah. I like that. I think that's pretty good. Darth Dawkins runs tag in a way that even I can't understand, so I wouldn't appeal to his arguments. That's fair. That's fair. I also prefer sort of the Jay Dyer approach. I'm not sure if I've heard really Darth Dawkins' full explication of that. I do want to see him debating Monkey Boy, though, which is why I was looking. Maybe this one is better.
Are you prepared to sustain that?
Okay, so I disagree on multiple accounts. First of all, you kind of made a non-informative answer. What you just said was vacuous. You said through God's creation, it supports God's existence. How is that the case? That's just a claim.
Okay. Every fact that we come to contact with possesses actuality. It could only possess actuality if and only if it was indicative and revelatory of the eternal. Okay? Now, this is a dichotomous situation. Either you're going to accept that or you won't. So which is it?
I don't accept that.
Okay, so then you're making an implicit counterclaim. Do you realize that?
Sure.
Okay, so then what you are saying then is that any facts that you are acquainted with, so-called facts, putative facts, they are not indicative of the eternal. Well, then that will rob the actual.
Okay, also, you said that's not actuality, though. Actuality is demonstrative of truth.
No. Actuality is what something actually is, okay?
Which can only be made through empirical demonstration.
No, sir, that's simply wrong. Okay, all right, wow. Okay, how old are you?
I'm 17.
Okay, so we can address that. I'm going to address it before Darth Dawkins gets to it because it seems like he's already going ad hominem by asking him how old he is. Why is that relevant? But, so presumably this is Monkey Boy speaking. I can't exactly tell. But Monkey Boy says things in actuality can only be confirmed to be actual by empirical, analysis or investigation, observation. But that can't be true. Because if you say that, then that means you don't actually love your mother, right? Unless you can do a science experiment that proves to me that you love your mother, then, I mean, that's just one of many things. The laws of logic can't be actual because you can't prove them empirically. Like we were talking about with the knowledge of the future can't be actual because you can't prove it empirically. So this is already Monkey Boy is starting off on a foot of extreme empiricism, which I don't think is going to be defensible. Well, hopefully Darth Dawkins can defend it, but
okay, you have a deeper voice. Yeah, you're quite. How shall I put this without sounding rude? You're quite uninformed philosophically. What you are advancing is called empiricism. Do you realize that?
Yes.
Okay, empiricism is self-refuting. So empiricism is the position. I'll explain it to you. Empiricism is the position that the only things that are worthy of believing are those things that are verifiable through our senses and empirical endeavors. Okay? Is that your position?
So what's your contention? Yes.
Okay. How was that truth statement verified empirically?
It's a foundational claim that's axiomatic.
Okay. Listen to me. What you
yeah, I think it is. We do have the advantage here. So it might be a totally different story if I'm debating Monkey Boy like head on head, like one on one, because then that's just a different realm you're in. You kind of get lost in arguments, and you're trying to think about what you're going to say next and think about what they're saying. This is great for us to be able to pause the video, slow it down, address each point on both sides, and really get to the bottom of it. And so I am admitting here that I have a huge advantage over Darth Dawkins in that I'm going to be able to pause the video. I'm going to be able to listen to it more slowly. I don't have the pressure of being the one who's actually responding. And so we can actually start to break down how this stuff doesn't work. So just to make sure to do this for both sides to avoid bias, absolutely. I want to, whenever I hear Darth Dawkins say something, I either want to confirm it or deny it. Using the exact same standard of, try to use as objective of a standard as I can. And yeah, a lot of times the atheists just cope and they say, it's neurochemicals, bro. It's neurochemicals. Okay, why do the neurochemicals behave that way? Why do they behave that way? Now, that appeal to an axiomatic foundational claim is where the issue is. Coherentism rejects such axioms while foundationalism affirms them. Yeah. Cool. All right, let's continue and see if we can find anything else.
You just gave me was bullshit. Okay. If you take a course in philosophy with any philosophy professor, even if he is a rank atheist philosophy professor, he will agree with me.
If you want, I could
appeal to authority, just to show everybody I'm being fair. Darth Dawkins, appeal to authority ad hominem by calling it. It's not really ad hominem, but it's just rude. It's just not. You're not going to get a productive, fruitful, open debate by calling people's things bullshit like that, even if they are bullshit. Okay, then attack the point. Don't attack the person. If it's a bullshit point, it should be easily refutable using logic and reason. So give Darth Dawkins his fair shake here, but.
I'm trying to explain this to you, okay? This is not even negotiable. It's not even debatable, okay? You cannot empirically demonstrate the following statement. The only things that are to be considered to be true are those things that are empirically demonstrated. How do you empirically demonstrate that? Well, give me a concrete empirical methodology to demonstrate that truth claim.
Good point. Great point.
Well, that's why it's a foundational claim.
No, you're not understanding. You're giving me a bullshit response. And you know what? You're getting off to a very bad start at 17 years old, and you're lying through rhetoric here, okay?
How am I lying?
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I don't think the kid knows that he's lying. Maybe he's getting off to a bad start, but he's also a kid. So I'm pretty sure, I definitely would have argued like this if I were the Monkey Boy or the 17-year-old. So again, it's like this sort of aggression is not fruitful to opening the mind of the person you're debating. So I'll just throw that out there again, and I won't stop it every time he does that, because I think this is just how Darth Dawkins is going to debate. Staying true to the name, to be fair.
Okay, I'm going to explain it to you. Do you know what positivism is?
No, I do not.
Logical positivism. Logical positivism is the precursor to empiricism. Logical positivism is the idea in the early part of the 20th century that the only beliefs that are worthy of believing, that are to be considered believable or coherent, are those that we can verify through our senses. Empiricism is just simply an extension of that, but it's basically the same thing, right? How do you empirically demonstrate that the only things that are worthy of believing are those that are empirically demonstrated? How do you empirically demonstrate that? And don't give me rhetoric. Tell me how you empirically demonstrate it. Do you do it by looking through a telescope? Do you do it through looking through a microscope? Can you demonstrate
Well,
it?
that would be empirical.
Okay. How do you empirically demonstrate the following proposition? The only beliefs that are worthy of accepting as true or that are coherent are those that are empirically demonstrable. How do you empirically demonstrate that? What methodology do you have in mind? That's empirical.
On the grounds that it's unchallengeable.
Okay, you're giving me a bullshit answer.
That doesn't make
sense. If you continue to do that, I will kick you from the room.
If you want, I could give you a different argument.
No. I asked you to give me an empirical methodology that demonstrates the proposition.
This is a good line of questioning. Actually.
I think it's rational to hold because it's the most
Monkey boy,
intelligent.
listen to me carefully. I'm going to warn you one more time. I'm about to kick you from the room. I have no patience for somebody who responds to me and they're lying through their teeth and they're dodging the question. I want you to give me an empirical methodology right now that demonstrates the proposition that the only beliefs that are worthy of believing are those that are empirically demonstrable. Give me that empirical methodology right now.
Wait, can I rationalize an answer? Or...
You have 10 seconds or I'm going to kick you. Give me the empirical methodology.
Okay, you're representing a black and white fallacy. That's not the two only options that can be
committed. You're a well-practiced liar, okay? See, this is the
again, I disagree with Darth Dawkins' approach here. I think it could be a lot it could lead to a more fruitful conversation, but this is a valid line of questioning. It does make Darth Dawkins look like an asshole, and it does make all the comments on this video say, you won, he's running, because of the way he's behaving. So his behavior, Darth Dawkins' behavior, not condoning. That's not how I would go about a debate. It's not how you win a debate. The actual argumentation is really solid here. So let's just break it down a little bit. Monkey Boy said, I only believe things which can, in fact, he's something even larger. He said, one should only believe things which can be empirically justified, which can be empirically shown to be true by, empirical evidence, observation. Now, the simple question, the simple follow-up to that is, okay, you should only believe things which can be empirically justified or observed. That is a belief. So what is the empirical evidence to hold that belief? It's a pretty simple question. And if you're going to hold that belief, it's a question you should be able to answer. Otherwise, you can't really hold it, because then if you say, I think you should only hold beliefs that can be empirically proven to be true, that is a belief that you have. So you have to empirically show it to be true. Otherwise, you shouldn't hold that belief based on your own worldview, based on the exact, precondition that you set up. So if you're going to set up a situation where you can only believe things based on empirical evidence, great. What's the empirical evidence for you to believe that? Right? I mean, that's right. I mean, that is the correct argumentation. I think Dawkins is getting too upset. I think he's making himself look bad. I don't think he should kick the kid. I think he should explain that more clearly the way I explained it. Again, I have the benefit of being able to pause the video. I'm not in the debate, yada, yada, yada. But hopefully so that you guys can see, this is a valid line of questioning and one that needs to be answered if Monkey Boy wants to hold his position. Okay, so notion of axioms aren't proven by other beliefs is nonsensical. Yep. Under coherentism, the idea is that beliefs are justified when they don't contradict the others within your belief system. Foundationalism thinks that beliefs are stacked on top of foundational beliefs that are justified through experience. I can look up non-inferentially justified beliefs. That'd be interesting. And that's what Monkey Boy is going to be appealing to. Yeah, optically speaking, Darth Dawkins looks so horrible here. I totally agree. Dawkins is about to explode. It's just not professional. I agree. Not just that, but where in the sense data is the truth of that belief? Exactly. Yeah. Where is that? And so you can't even justify it empirically, but you also can't even justify it based off of your initial senses. Exactly. Only empirically verifiable beliefs should be believed. So where do you get that from? Where is that in the data that you have? And Monkey Boy is refusing to answer the question. So I get why there would be some frustration. This could be gone about a lot better, but let's see. I mean, all these comments are saying Monkey Boy won, Monkey Boy embarrassed him, Monkey Boy did this and that. But so far he hasn't done anything. So maybe there's more.
Game that they play, dodge, 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 dodge. Okay.
And
I asked him over and over again for an empirical methodology to demonstrate the claim that the only beliefs that are worthy of believing are those that are empirically demonstrable. And he never did. He didn't give me an empirical methodology, did he?
No.
And that's,
even Steve knows that.
I also know that there's only one realistic answer, and Darth knows that too. The answer is there is none.
No, that's why I'm trying to show him people taking a stand. You see, he's 17 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Even an atheist professor of philosophy wouldn't be so stupid as to make that error.
Well,
they understand that.
That's just.
I was just going to say, I'm no philosopher, Darth, but I know by listening to you enough times that you ask questions where realistically there's only one answer that's actually true. And if you don't get that answer, you're going to ask them again. You're going to give them the time to give you the answer. The only answer is there is none. And if you hum and haw, then you either don't understand or you're not being true.
He's 17. He's grown up in probably the public or private school systems where we glorify science, because science has brought us many wonderful things like cell phones and movies and all this kind of stuff. But the point is, what he doesn't realize is that empiricism is self-refuting. Okay, I'm going to give you one more chance. If you lie to me one more time, you'll be gone permanently. Okay. So, are you going to give me the empirical methodology? I don't want to hear anything else that comes out of your mouth. Give me the empirical methodology that demonstrates the proposition.
I don't have any.
Okay, so you don't have any because there can't be any. That's why empiricism, which is a permeative.
So even forget that you don't have any because there can't be any. You don't have any. That's it. That's it. So you can't hold that belief. That's it. Monkey Boy said in order to hold beliefs, you have to have empirical proof. Monkey Boy says, I don't have the evidence, rather. I don't have the empirical evidence. I don't even have an empirical methodology. Argument over. Debate won on that specific point. Monkey Boy cannot hold the belief that he holds rationally. He just can't in this case. So Monkey Boy is very sharp when it comes to classical arguments like Kalam or design. I'm unsure how deep he's gone in epistemology. Yeah, at this point, and I'm not even blaming him. I think Monkey Boy probably is even more educated on some of these arguments than me. But so far, he is not equipped to handle the transcendental argument just based off the foundation of that he laid already. And again, I'm not saying I would do any better, but this is why I believe in God, because I have yet to hear any sort of atheistic, rational refutation of the grounding of the transcendental categories. And I'm still interested in this debate, so we'll keep listening to that. Hold these beliefs. Monkey Boy is just a fast talker. Yeah. I mean, we'll see. Maybe there's something else here. And just for a walk with the Spirit, just to recap, basically all that's happened in this debate so far is that Monkey Boy has said, in order to hold beliefs, you should have empirical evidence. Then Darth Dawkins simply asked him, okay, in order to hold beliefs, you should have empirical evidence. What is your empirical evidence for holding that belief? And Monkey Boy conceded, I have none. Pretty self-defeating. That's about as self-defeating as it gets, right? Okay. So.
Interpretation of logical positivism is self-refuting. Okay?
Wait, but how did you determine that?
Okay. It's self-refuting because it's
How did
self-contradictory.
you determine that?
The only propositions that are worthy of believing are those that are verified by our sense perception.
But you're saying that
How is that?
insufficiency.
Listen, I'm explaining it to you, sunshine. I think I've learned a little bit more on this planet being 61 years old.
I hate
than
appealing
you
to
do.
age. Appealing to age and appealing to authority. Like, Darth Dawkins is doing way more than he needs to do, and he's coming off really poorly. And that's why all the idiot commenters think that he lost, even though he has the correct position. So I'm not just being unfair to Monkey Boy here. I'm actually more disappointed in Darth Dawkins being 63 years old, not understanding how to have a fruitful and actually mind-opening debate versus this 17-year-old who's just trying his best, man. I mean, like, come on, he's 17. We all have silly thoughts when we're 17. Truth is objectively subjective. Monkey nuts, exactly. Another classic atheistic self-defeating argument. Truth is subjective. Oh, is it? Because that's an objective truth claim. If all truth is subjective, that is an objective truth claim. So where'd you get that from, right? Another self-defeater.
At 17. I think I know a little bit more than you do. Okay? Now, it is widely accepted within the ranks of philosophy across a spectrum of metaphysical beliefs, including atheist professors of philosophy, that logical positivism, which has also permeated into what is called empiricism, is self-refuting, because the contents of the proposition cannot itself be verified by its own standard. Okay?
But you have yet to determine.
Are you this
there's no
craven?
sufficient
You know what?
adequacy to actually justify that empiricism.
I pity you as a 17-year-old man that you were so committed to being deceptive at such an early age. Okay? Listen carefully.
How am I being?
Listen to me. Do you think I'm making it up to you? Listen to me.
Yeah, I think you're that's fair, Marshall. I can't even imagine how many of these debates against how many bad faith debaters he's had. That, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is like a war vet or something that you might just develop this kind of like gruff defense mechanism. So that's fair. I can understand where it comes from. That doesn't mean I support the style of debate. But I do see that it could have value, especially again. This would be a very valuable way to debate bad faith debaters. The problem with this specific debate is that Monkey Boy, I don't think, is bad faith. He's just a young kid, right? So he has his view. He doesn't quite understand where the view falls apart. So it takes a little more delicacy to actually explain where the view falls apart. Yeah, it cannot be healthy to be arguing 24/7. And even, honestly, 3 times a week for me is too much to be, like, straight arguing the way that I do it. So that's why I try to, like, switch up the streams. They're not all debate style. Some of them are more like this, where we just talk about worldviews and stuff like that. It really does take a toll on your mental health to be constantly defending your faith or your worldview or whatever. I can see why that would happen. I think so. It's the same with a lot of Christians. They're just tired of stupidity and willfully ignorant interlocutors. Yep, totally. I mean, definitely. Which is very unfortunate for Monkey Boy because I think, yeah, like Monkey Boy is acting in good faith. I think he just doesn't quite understand the argument yet. So it takes a little bit of a softer touch than Darth Dawkins has right here.
Do you think I'm making this up, that logical positivism is nearly universally regarded as self-refuting in the world of philosophy? Do you think I'm making that up?
But you realize it doesn't logically follow that me being invalid means I'm deceiving.
You listen. I've been
True.
doing this for
That's a
12
good
years.
point by
I've
Monkey
debated
Boy.
thousands of atheists.
That's a good point.
I know when people are being evasive and
that's not
deceptive.
relevant.
It is relevant. Okay, because with experience comes knowledge and discernment. Okay.
Do you know
Now,
what
are you
polylogism is?
are
Every
you-
individual is an individual in their own set of mind. That's what
Listen to me.
Solipsism works.
You're 17 years old.
Yes, I'm 17.
You're barely out of your teeny bopper years. Okay, and you know so much, don't you?
Teeny bopper.
Are you an atheist?
Yes.
Good. Tell me why God doesn't exist.
Sure. So, there's something called Aristotle's 4 causes, which is material cause, efficient cause, formal cause, final cause. They're axiomatically contingent to each other to say that there's a material cause or efficient cause without a material.
Stop right there. Stop right there. Okay. Is there anything that is singularly ultimate that dictates all states of affairs?
That's a loaded question.
No, it's not a loaded question. When people are afraid to answer a question, either because out of ignorance or they don't know how to defend either the pro or con, they say it's a loaded question. Can you tell me what a loaded question is in one sentence?
Something that makes an assumption.
No.
Your question
sir.
of
No, sir.
Yes.
A loaded question
You're
is a
presupposing
question.
something in your question.
No, it doesn't matter. All questions presuppose something. Therefore,
Not
if
inherently.
a loaded question, if you ever talk me again, I'm going to kick you from the room. I won't just move you back to the audience. You don't know what you're talking about. What you're typically doing is a retort that people use as a strategy.
Okay, so yeah, I got some chats here. He who fights with monsters must be careful lest he become a monster. Great quote. So why I do not argue. I'm afraid of becoming a Darth Dawkins. Yeah, I pray every day I don't become a Darth Dawkins type. Sure, because some philosopher told me to think a certain way. That's not a reason. Yeah, totally agree. I mean, Aristotle said I should do this, therefore I should do this. No, you have to abide by the actual logic of the arguments. Otherwise, you do get into this sort of trap here that Monkey Boy's in, unfortunately for him. But it is interesting because we get to see a deconstruction of sort of a naive transcendental argument from the atheistic side. And even though Darth Dawkins could be a little kinder and nicer and whatever, he is giving the proper response to these questions, asking the right questions to prod the conversation further. So that's great. I'll be right back. I'm going to play it for you guys.
That when they don't want to answer a question, either because of their own ignorance or they can't defend either the yay or the nay, what they will say, they will retort as saying, well, that's a loaded question. A loaded question is not one that contains an assumption, because then that would mean that all questions are loaded, because all questions are laden with assumptions. Do you realize that? Do you realize all questions are laden with assumptions?
I reject that.
Okay, goodbye. You're an idiot. Okay, all right. See, this is why you just can't deal with certain people and social networks like this, is because they will just lie through their teeth about anything and everything. So it's pointless talking to them. So in other words, if I ask...
Okay. I don't do debates, but one day I hope to control my inner spurg. Darth has this weird argument to give the burden of proof to the agnostic. If God exists, he has made himself known to all. Thus, your agnosticism is a rejection of the God concept. However, I feel like that there are better ways to give the burden to all worldviews. Yeah, I think it's unfair to heap it all on the agnostic, especially to say, basically to accuse them of malice, i.e., hating God because they must know God is true, when it could be a bit of ignorance, or it could be a bit of confusion, or it could be something other than malice that is like a personal, maybe they've been hurt by people in the church or something like that. So technically every belief system must be able to allow for reasoning, or else you can't reason about rejecting them. I do understand that. I think every person has reason. Now it's obviously the case that every worldview can't justify reason. I don't think pretty much any worldviews can justify reason other than theistic, personal God worldviews, which end up just being Christian ones, essentially. I think Islam could justify reason, but then that comes with its own problems of having this like simplistic Unitarian God who can't, for instance, experience love without his creation, right? So, I think just because every person has reason doesn't mean that their worldviews have a foundation for reason. And so that's the power of the transcendental argument, really. It's about comparing worldviews and seeing which ones give you a better explanation for the world that we find ourselves in. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fair to give the burden of proof all to the agnostic, but I think it's fair to question the agnostic's worldview and say, well, how do you rationalize? How do you justify the transcendental categories? And if they can't, then I think that's a good reason to say that those worldviews are not valid. Every belief system must allow for reasoning or they become self-refuting. Thus, if only Christianity allows for it, then there's no other worldview that doesn't self-contradict. Yeah, but there's a different... That's true. But just because every person... So obviously the atheist, the naturalist, the physicalist uses logic and reason to justify their worldviews, or to like explain their worldviews or examine them or something. That doesn't mean that their worldview actually allows it, because as we talked about, naturalism, physicalism is self-refuting when it comes to transcendental categories, when it comes to laws of logic and things like that. Does that mean that the atheist has no reason, has no logic? Of course not. I would just say they have it, but it doesn't come from their worldview. It doesn't come from, it comes from really our worldview, from God, from the embodied personal mind. So every belief system like allows it, but not every belief system actually incorporates logic into this like grounding, into its foundation. Most of them don't. So I would say to the extent that someone, say an atheist, uses reason and uses logic to make points, they're actually like subverting their own worldview. Yeah. The point is that their worldview is self-contradictory, not themselves, right? So, let's continue.
Steve, did you have a cup of coffee today? There are no implicit assumptions within the question.
And also for our friends in the audience that have trouble seeing, while Darth asked about the loaded question, I went onto the internet, take it for what it's worth. I'll read it. Darth, I'm assuming you'll agree. But it says, a loaded question is a form of complex questions that contain a controversial assumption.
Controversial assumption.
Yes, correct. Controversial assumption. Such questions may be used as a rhetorical tool. The question attempts to limit direct replies to be those that serve the questioner's agenda. That's what I got off the internet.
Yeah. So to put it succinctly, a loaded question is a question that contains an otherwise objectionable premise or assumption to the questionee that the questionee would not agree to. Okay?
And for me to put it simply, basically, Darth is asking a question which really only has one answer. When Darth asks these loaded questions, he's not asking because he doesn't know the answer.
It's not a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's a dichotomous question. Okay?
Yep.
And they're
questions. He's not
asking. He doesn't let people talk.
It's a dichotomous question.
Yo, he's such an idiot. So I was trying to inquire, right?
And answering
he said like
yay or nay.
He banned me from the room. He banned me. I got kicked from the room. I no longer can debate him.
Yep.
Yeah, see, it would have been a lot.
The fuck?
It would have been a lot better to keep Monkey Boy in the room, treat him a little more gently, and then you might actually change his mind, because Monkey Boy was fundamentally wrong, and he presented a totally self-contradictory view, which would have been really easy to point out and force him to deal with. But instead, Monkey Boy said a couple stupid things and he gets kicked from the room, and then you have no opportunity to actually debate him. But this is a W for Tag for sure. Marshall, peace and love, brother. God be with you. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, to Numenon, gotta go. Hell yeah, man. Welcome. Thank you for contributing, and thank you for watching. There's some great contributions there. Tag is the best. Tag is the best argument, I think, for the existence of God. The strongest, the hardest to refute. Monkey Boy got banned after saying that was a loaded question. I mean, that's just unfair, because you know what? It wasn't. Maybe, in some ways, it was a loaded question, because it was a question towards an end that only has one answer, and in some ways it wasn't. But it doesn't really matter. They should have actually argued the points, but instead he gets kicked, and we get this video with 8,000 views where everyone thinks that Monkey Boy won when he obviously didn't. but just the behavior of Darth made it seem like he did. Let's see if there's another good Monkey Boy video we can. To pre-sup Rubble. Okay. Yes, indeed. I must study this opponent well. Yeah, absolutely. I think personally, I think on the that specific debate, maybe Monkey Boy would destroy me on other debates, or I don't know, or if I was actually in the room. But on that specific debate, I have a clear strategy of what I would do. Just force him to acknowledge that he can't hold the belief that you can only believe things that have empirical evidence pointing to them, because that claim itself has no empirical evidence pointing to it. And then it's like debate over, and then I wouldn't have kicked him. It wouldn't have been clear who won. I would have obviously won, but so it's funny that he goes at, yeah, you're right. Like, so Monkey Boy always goes after pre-subs and tag arguers. It's funny that he goes after them, but it seems like they should beat him every time. That's why I'm trying to find a good one. This could be good.
This is concrete gaslighting and project.
He will say, "I remain unconvinced." I know. Isn't that funny? That is the ultimate runaway. Yes, you can just always say that. I mean, like, someone could tell me the sky is blue, and I could literally say, "I'm unconvinced by that." It's so frustrating because there's no response. Okay, you're not convinced, whatever. So that's why it's important, even if they cop out and say, like, "I remain unconvinced," you just present the argument the best you can, and it's then at that point, they're not engaging intellectually when they get to the point of "I remain unconvinced." So it's more for the audience. It's more for whoever's listening. And just to practice your own, like, expressing your own worldview. But yeah, that is the most frustrating move that people can make is "I remain unconvinced." Okay, fine, I guess. But then don't say there's no evidence for God in some other debate, right? Because you were presented with a bunch of evidence for God that you were just unconvinced by. But that you can't say there's no evidence, right? Which is what they often say.
So, just a quick point of moderation. We have Bandau. Is it Bandau or Bandu?
Bandu, I think.
Bandu, sorry. And Monkey Boy, who I believe are ready to debate soon. Can you just mic up and say you're ready?
Oh, Monkey Boy, that's a 17-year-old that beat Darth. That's
What
hilarious.
are they going to debate?
Yeah, right.
Big fan.
Not sure. Preset maybe? Bandu and Monkey Boy, say that you're ready?
Yeah,
Maybe
I'm ready whenever you guys are.
Was that Nelson? Was that Nelson?
Monkey
And
Boy,
also,
you ready?
as a point of moderation, it's
Nelson's
just
not
going to
here.
be those two.
Yeah, sure.
If you interrupt, we will boot you from the stage. Please don't.
Yeah, the only people who could interrupt are mods, just to say if they're over talking or not answering a question or something. Otherwise, everyone else.
I would
All right,
love
boy.
if concrete interrupt.
Also, before the code starts flowing.
He's just like.
Okay, boys, you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you doing today, Monkey?
I.
Okay, so yeah, what's on your mind?
What do you mean?
In regards to this, is there something particularly you wanted to start with the topic?
I guess, why do you believe in Christianity or whatever theist position you hold?
Oh, because it's true.
That's a non-informative answer. What's like the logical, like?
No, you
what's
asked me. You asked me a reason, and I gave you my reason because it's true.
Yeah, sure, that's fine. What is indicative of the truth that it is true?
You're saying, how did I find out that it's true?
Yeah, how have you derived at this fact?
It's because it's a source of truth, and I've been drawn to it by God.
Okay, so what determines that you were drawn by God?
What determines God? That isn't the answer.
But how have you determined it was God?
Okay, so you're asking me how do I know God drew me to him?
Yes.
Okay, because God lays out the system of how that process works out.
Can you extrapolate on that?
Yeah, so God's word he teaches that you can't come to God unless God draws you.
Wait.
Specifically, anything that I know about my reality and
What do you mean by
God
God's
himself, word? God's message to mankind.
Which is?
Are you talking about this specifically? Is the Bible? Yeah.
Okay. Well, what determined that that's God's word?
And just like a text message assumes the person who's receiving any sort of text message usually has it marked down the name of the person they're receiving it from. So just the same thing with this, that it's God's name is attached to his message.
Do you mind reiterating that in like a more transparent way?
Yeah. So God alters his message. He doesn't make it mysterious.
Okay. So when we talk about what do you define God to be? For clarity.
The supreme creator of all existence.
Okay, how do you know that it wasn't inventive, that it's a complete fabrication? How have you derived that it wasn't just random authors who established and claimed this to be God, but rather it is indeed the writing of God?
Well, specifically, if you look at what Scripture is, what its essence is, it's breathed out by God. It explains that.
So this is a little circular on this guy, on Bandu's part. I mean, I think it's okay to do this. He's being a little bit, it seems, intentionally, like, what am I trying to say? I want to say like direct. I think this is a good debate strategy. Like really make your opponent do most of the work, make them ask most of the questions and stuff. But what I would say a little more directly to the multiple questions of how do you know this is God's word? How do you know the Bible is a legitimate transmitter of God's will and intention for humanity? I think one of the strongest things you can look to is the fulfillment of prophecy throughout the word, because it's already been conceded that the Bible was a book written by, many different people, or actually it's not a book, it's a library of texts written by many different people over the course of history, over a very long course of history. And so if that were not divinely tied together or inspired by God, then first of all, you would expect all sorts of contradictions, and not just like minor contradictions that people sometimes point to, but you would expect major theological contradictions as people's theology develops and change if it were just people. But what we actually see in the Bible throughout 6,000 years of its history of being written is an extreme coherence to singular theological ideas. Okay, so there's that. Then you also see on top of that, the coherence of the Bible theologically, you see prophecies made at a specific time in history, which can be dated to a time in history, becoming fulfilled hundreds or even thousands of years later. Now, some of the most powerful prophecies are, say, Daniel and Isaiah predicting Jesus, but there's even smaller ones that you can point to. Like, for instance, the fall of Jerusalem being prophesied all the time and it actually happening on those kind of time frames. But it's also said that the Bible predicts Alexander the Great and his sort of domain, his dominion. Welcome back, Numenon. Welcome back. Thank you. You guys are picking. Okay, so the fact that I got to Bandu's flaws fast are pretty good. Yeah, I'm just slightly unimpressed with Bandu, so that's okay. I am impressed more so with Monkey Boy here, being able to get to the bottom of it. I think Bandu can still make a good point here, so I'm still interested. I think he could have gotten to it quicker, though, and not been so dense in terms of the responses. Thank you, Walk with the Spirit. Appreciate you, brother. And welcome back, Numenon, of course. I am not Eastern Orthodox, Walk with the Spirit. I am a Protestant. But in this stream, I'm very ecumenical. But also, for transparency, I love Orthodox. I love learning about the saints. I love their tradition. I've even been to Orthodox services, which I felt, I don't know, they were great. So if you're Eastern Orthodox, just know that I respect and appreciate you. and that there's a reasonable future where I am one as well. But I'm just following the path the best I can right now, and I feel called to be in my Protestant church. So, yeah, cool. All right, let's continue with this.
That in God's word, that this is not just some sort of man-made text or thoughts or inspiration of what God could be based on our sort of round table discussions, but this is God's word being breathed out through His Spirit.
Yeah. How do you distinguish this between other theistic books and biblical texts?
So, like, are you saying, like, what's the difference between the Quran and the Bible? Well, I mean, specifically, it's almost the same in the terms of revelation. So man or man receiving God's word, but or at least
looks like we got a bunch of fringe Orthodox here. A lot of people right on the border in this chat, which I appreciate. Now, I don't want to discredit my Protestant tradition either, because I think there's a lot to be said about that. But anyway, just yeah, usually Eastern Orthodox are the tag guys. And actually, the Jay Dyer approach to tag is that only the Eastern Orthodox God can accurately ground the transcendental categories. I'd have to hear him explain that a little bit more. I think he makes assumptions about Protestant beliefs that exclude it from fulfilling the transcendental categories. But yeah, I think it can be. I think you can be a Protestant and hold all the necessary proper views about divinity and about God's nature, even if the mainstream of whatever church you're in doesn't particularly say that stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's a little heretical, but I'm not sure. So yeah. Oh, Numenon. Yeah, you learned most of your philosophy from Jay Dyer's community. That's a great community. And EO has a philosophical history, so they do love. I'm not sure. So yeah. Oh, Numenon. Philosophy from Jay Dyer's community. That's a great community. Philosophical history, so they do love tag. Yeah, for a long time. And a lot of the church fathers in so many forms and so many words and stuff like that.
The claim of it, but essentially the essential difference is if the God of truth is...
Yeah, exactly. Jesus is not exclusive to one group. And if we look at the Bible, really technically what it says, I want to say this is in Romans, but I'm not 100% positive. But it's that he who confesses with his mouth and believes in his heart that Jesus Christ is Lord and that he died and rose again will be saved. So I'm extremely ecumenical here. I believe all my Christian brothers and sisters will be readily and easily accepted into the arms of Christ. I even have space. Like I say, I know where salvation is in Christ. I don't know where it is not. So I make no claims about who gets saved or who doesn't get saved. But I do know that all my Christian brothers and sisters, especially if they present the fruits of the Spirit, that they genuinely believe in their heart and also confess with their mouth, then that's who is saved. But yeah, Jesus, not exclusive to one group, not exclusive at all.
Giving a message to mankind is going to be consistent. And when we go look at the Quran or other sort of supposed holy texts, there's major contradictions in them, which would be impossible for God to have any sort of contradictions in his message. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you don't mind me asking you a few questions now. So you're an atheist, right?
The last thing you said, you kind of cut out. Can you re-say what you said?
My question? Can you hear me?
No, not the question. Prior to the question.
Oh, okay. If I cut out, I'm sorry. What I was saying with that primary answer is that the major difference between the Quran and the Bible is the consistency within the text, and that God can't contradict himself. If the God of truth is providing a message to mankind, who is the source of truth, then his word wouldn't have any errors in it or contradictions in it. And so this is the major issue with the Quran. It's filled with contradictions.
Okay, so you claim that the Christian Bible holds no contradictions, correct?
Yes.
Also, I'm sorry about my background. Right now, I'm in with my siblings, so if there's noise in the background, because for some reason my mic just picks up like every shit that's said, just try and
No,
ignore that.
I think it's fine. It's good.
All right. Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
Oh, I said I think it's fine. Like your mic's fine. I don't hear anything
No,
wrong with it.
not that. The thing prior.
Talked about the difference between the Quran and the Bible.
No, he said the Bible contains no contradictions. That's what you asked him.
Can we?
Yeah, I just simply said yes. It doesn't have any.
So, but how have you determined that? Like, with all the facts you're acquainted with, do you believe it holds no contradictions, or how have you determined that everything it says?
I've studied Islam. I've read the Quran directly. I've gone to imams, and I've gone specifically. I've grown up and read different things with Christianity as well, so I can compare the two and clearly see that. And so can anyone else.
Okay, yeah, we'll address a couple of things here. So we got in the chat, we got Martial Esotericist. My beliefs are close to Zoroastrian Gnosticism, but I don't claim to be Gnostic. Believe that Christ was very powerful, but for the sake of the chat, I do not wish to express my heretical beliefs, not make myself an enemy. And yeah, do not worry about that, brother. You won't be an enemy in this chat. I will be stern with people who try to make you one, because we're all on our journey here. We really are. And, you know, it's very possible that your Zoroastrian Gnosticism is closer to the actual practice of Christianity than people who profess Christ's name but do not display his fruits. So I think people, and I'm just warning my chat to be very respectful of where other people are at in their journey and in their life and in their faith. And we want to be careful not to become Darth Dawkins, who's going to kick people out and exclude them and make them feel belittled for simply having what we would consider to be not the fullness of the truth or something like that. So Martial Esotericist is more than welcome here, and I take him to have a very Christian ethic at the very least. And who knows what will happen in his journey. I don't want to presume anything, but you know, we're all here for a reason here. So, and to Numenon, couldn't God write a contradictory book if he wanted to? I think, yeah, I'm not totally convinced by Bandu's. For one, this isn't pre-sup, really, even though it said he was a pre-sup apologetic. Maybe he will get into that. But yeah, this is not the best way of debating an atheist, because an atheist is going to be able to point to like hundreds of, this is major scare quotes, scare quotes, contradictions in the Bible. Now, importantly, when we get into these contradictions, they never are. So I do agree with Bandu that there are not like logical contradictions. There are not intrinsic contradictions in the Bible. But the reason the Bible says things that are sometimes hard to like synthesize with the other things it says is because it's a divine book expressing an ineffable will through human lenses, through words. So how do words describe something ineffable? Usually imperfectly, right? So that's the major difference between the Bible and the Quran. The Quran is considered to be the uncreated word of God, so it must be perfect. It must be, there cannot be anything even seemingly contradictory in the Quran, otherwise the whole thing falls apart. But in the Bible, there's a recognition that the true word of God is Jesus Christ, as we're shown in John 1, and that the Bible is the divinely inspired sort of lowercase w word of God. So everything that's in the Bible is meant to be there, but it's not as straightforward as the Quranic claim of like of Quranic inerrancy. So this is going to be a really tough position to defend from Bandu to Monkey Boy, because they're going to have to get into the specifics of each of these contradictions, and Bandu's going to have a good argument for why each of the contradictions is not actually a contradiction. And again, remember, contradiction is scare quotes when I'm talking about the Bible here. Yeah, we will lure you into Christ, brother. Exactly. Don't give away the game plan. Right. Yeah, you guys are speaking the subtext here, but everyone is welcome and appreciated here. But Jesus is God, though. Elbow cough, elbow cough. Yeah. Okay. Looks like we do have someone else in the chat. ALC doing elbow coughs. I appreciate you. Welcome. So, yeah, to sum this up, Bandu, he's using... This is a strategy that can be defended, that can work, but it's intensive. It's going to be really hard. And the atheist can always go to one more seeming contradiction to try to tear down your point that the Bible is free of contradictions. Now, you'd have an easier time arguing the meta point that the Bible is free of actual contradiction, but not like sort of seeming surface level contradiction, right? So we'll continue and see how this goes. Hopefully it gets into precept, because that's going to be a lot stronger. That's going to be a lot better to defend against Monkey Boy. As we already know, Monkey Boy doesn't have the tools to defend a precept argument. But
I'm not asking what's more consistent between the Quran and Bible. I'm saying, how have you determined that there is no contradictions within the theistic Bible?
I read them.
Christian.
You can read the God's word. It's consistent. Yeah.
So reading it isn't a determinant as to how it's verified to be flawless without contradiction.
For example, so Jesus doesn't say in the Gospels, in one Gospel, it's that you should love your neighbors, and then the next Gospel he said you should eat your neighbors, right? So there's no major contradiction in this regard.
Another way that could be putting it, there's theological consistency, theological coherence in the Bible, which is a library of text from a multitude of people written over thousands and thousands of years. Unless there was some sort of divine inspiration or higher power guiding the transmission of the Holy Bible, you couldn't expect to see that. These people live in vastly different cultures, communities, physical locations. They're subject to very different political regimes and structures, and you would expect sort of a if this was just written by people expressing their own interests, you would expect a total hodgepodge of theologies, which is not what we get. We get one consistent, coherent theology that can be tracked all the way through from Old Testament to New. You've listened to Monkey Boy and Angstreich for a bit. Their main objection against tag is why only God could ground the transcendentals instead of some other metaphysical thing. And that's a good point. But then I would just ask them to explain what that other metaphysical thing is. Because if they just say it's a brute fact, then you're building your house on sand. That's not good enough. You have this like multiplicitous sort of, it just is how it is logic, very circular. But if you want to say it's grounded in some other metaphysical thing other than them just being brute facts, well, that's what we're claiming. We're claiming that they are grounded in some metaphysical thing. But what is the nature of that metaphysical thing given the nature of the transcendental categories? So one of those things is it must be supremely powerful. So it must be bigger than the universe in order for the laws of logic to be bigger than the universe. Whatever grounds the laws of logic must also be bigger than the universe and bigger than the laws of logic themselves. It must be personal. It must have a mind and a will in order to instantiate logic, instantiate abstract concepts, So whatever this metaphysical thing, other thing they're talking about is, it must hold the qualities that we typically ascribe in natural theology to God. So again, that's sort of either a cop-out or it's just saying they're brute facts and I don't have to explain how they're grounded. If you don't have to explain it, then what are we debating about, essentially?
Within that regard, but that doesn't derive that everything it states holds no contradiction.
Oh, okay. So what contradiction do you have in mind?
I haven't presented any. You said it's without contradiction, so I'm asking how have you determined that?
Okay, so present one.
Well, the entire fact is based on reading the Bible.
But that's not that's not informative. I'm asking. So through
you asked me specifically how.
So Monkey Boy here, to be clear, does have to present a contradiction for Bandu to respond to. Otherwise, he's just saying. So Bandu is saying, "I've read the Bible. There's no contradictions." Monkey Boy's saying, Well, how do you know there's no contradictions? And the next logical step is to say, okay, well then present me one if you think there are, because I can't prove, like, imagine like if I read Harry Potter and I said there's no contradictions in Harry Potter, and you said prove it. How would you even begin to prove that? Like by reading it out loud or something? Reading the whole Bible out loud in the chat? No. So what Monkey Boy has to do now is present a contradiction to try to disprove the claim that there are no contradictions. So that's where we're at. The personal part is where the main contention seems to be. FD has a nice paper arguing for a personal being to create the world with purpose. Cool. Yeah, I think the personal part is crucial, and I think most of these transcendentals are impossible without a personality or a personal element instantiating them. That's the key point, really.
How can I say it has no contradictions? And I told you because I've read it.
So you read the entirety of the Bible?
I'm sorry?
So you read the entirety of the Bible, correct?
Yes.
And nothing from what you've perceived held contradiction?
No. And just what we expect if the God of truth were to give a revelation.
I'm not also following. Why does something being consistent with itself necessarily follow that it was the writing of God?
That's just an evidence.
Because this is the point that God is the one who says he's the one backing the revelation.
Okay, let's say Harry Potter was...
It's a piece of evidence that confirms your worldview. It's not the reason that God is divine is not that there are no contradictions. As Numenon said, God probably, if he wanted to, although maybe not, because God is truthful. Truth is a good, and God is maximally good, so God is maximally truthful. So to present a contradiction, especially like a fallacious one, might not be possible given God's nature. But besides the point, I forgot what I already forgot where we were going. Anyway, let's keep.
It was absolutely consistent with its objective cohesion of story.
Oh yeah, I was saying
narrative. And then claimed that it was written by authors that were revealed by God. Would you take that to be true?
That's a whole different premise of what Harry Potter actually is. There's an author behind Harry Potter that says it's a work of fiction and fantasy, whereas the author of the Bible is the one
you're kind of attacking the analogy.
Himself,
I made a very blatant that I am making an arbitrary analogy as if it was written by God, that the author was revealed that this was from God.
To compare an act of a work of fiction to the #1 best-selling book of the world, where all people groups of the world have gone to be their source of truth, is just a long shot. That's just really useless. I mean, if you're going to actually compare different sort of scriptures, that would actually be more informative and helpful for people. But just to compare a work of fiction to a religious text is almost meaningless.
But that's okay. So you're going with a common consensus that we realize it is a fictional writing. But let's say we had no knowledge of this. We're not cognizant of it. And it was said it was written by, the author was revealed by God to write this, and it was consistent. How would you determine it's
So you're saying I'm opening Harry Potter without having any ideas of the author, the context of the history behind the book?
No. I don't even mean, like what you mean by that.
No, I'm saying if I were to open Harry Potter and I don't even know it's a work of fiction, and if I were just to take it at face value, right?
Well, let's say no one knows that it's just a putative fact that it is not, and then we all just take it to be true because the author of it claims he was revealed this writing to write it by God, and it's consistent with itself. The writing.
Okay, so now you're saying that if the author of the Harry Potter book said this was actually true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, do you know that that's the major difference between the Bible and a supposed prophet who received a private revelation, and now everyone needs to follow them? Is that God speaks consistently through to mankind throughout the generations? Is that there's not a one specific person who received God's revelation? Now the entire canon of the Bible is completed. Is that God spoke consistently throughout generations since the beginning of time until the last part of the canon in around AD 77, and now this is the entire point: is that it's not just one person, because one person can manipulate a text, they can control the text, and usually they just make false religions and try to abuse people through it. But that's the major difference, is that God needs to speak consistently, and that would be an inconsistent point is what you're trying to make right here in this situation.
Okay, so I don't want to get too much into this, but through what you said, how about we digress into an entertained view and somewhat of a rabbit trail? since you believe that the Bible is without contradiction,
Well,
and
well,
I
you,
myself,
sir, you've been asking me a lot of questions. Do you mind if I ask you a few? It would be actually quite fair.
Oh, sure.
I think that would be fair. I see. I understand Monkey Boy's point here, and it might actually be a valid point that just because something is internally consistent does not mean that it's divinely inspired. But Bandy snuck in a point. He actually snuck over it by accident, which would have been really good, which is the Bible is not just internally consistent. It claims to be the Word of God. So I think he kind of made that point. The history confirms it as the Word of God, i.e. the fact that there are prophecies and predictions that come true. And I'd say the surrounding context also contributes to its validity as the Word of God. And he made a good point, too, that the difference between something like the Bible and something like the Golden Tablets of Mormonism are that the Bible is revealed to multiple different people. The scripture, which the Bible consists of, are revealed to many different prophecies throughout history, or many different prophets throughout history, which makes it more trustworthy than something that's revealed to just one person, like i.e. Muhammad or Joseph Smith or, who's the Scientology guy, L. Ron Hubbard or whatever. So there's something different about the Bible than the other religious traditions who claim, to have a prophet per se. So,
I guess that's fine.
Okay, so are you an atheist?
Yes.
Why are you an atheist?
I believe there's sufficient evidence to warrant the ideology that God does not exist.
How do you interpret this evidence?
Just ask what the evidence is. You don't need interpretation. Just ask Monkey Boy, what is your evidence that God does not exist? This question, I guarantee you, cannot be answered. Now, how do you interpret this evidence? Maybe we'll get to the same end, but the simple, straightforward response is, what is this evidence? Okay, so ChatGPT makes stuff up. Yeah, I think it did make that up. Consistency is what you'd expect if God made it, and that it would be unlikely or under a purely naturalistic situation. But then again, evidence is interpreted around your more fundamental worldview commitments. Right, so that's true. That would be a good counterpoint by Monkey Boy or the atheist to this. So, yeah, you don't want to stick on God is real because the Bible is consistent, because there's a defeater for that, or at least that can be brought into question. You want to just point to the consistency of the Bible as, like you said, either unexpected, given naturalistic terms, or part of a corpus of evidence that largely confirms the truth of the Bible. That would be a better way of putting it, yeah.
What do you mean by how do I interpret it?
You said that there was sufficient evidence that God doesn't exist. I'm asking you, how can you analyze this evidence?
How do I analyze this evidence?
Yes.
With my mind.
And do you assume that your mind can accurately interpret evidence?
No, but it seems you're kind of presupposing that God facilitates my mind.
No, well, no, we're not even talking about God. We're talking about the non-God world. We're talking about your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep focused on that. I'm asking you, do you think that your mind is reliable enough to analyze this evidence accurately?
First of all, just ask him what the evidence is. I mean, that would be a much stronger way to continue. I mean, I get what he's trying to push the conversation into the explicitly precept world, but if you ask what the evidence is, then you will naturally go to precept. You'll go to tag. So this is a little circuitous, a little bit. I think he's just like getting ahead of himself here, Bandit. He could slow down. He could just ask the simple question, what is the evidence that God exists? Because I can't think of a single evidence for God not existing. I mean, that almost doesn't even make sense as a statement. Yeah, Marshall. No worries, dude. Be as active or inactive or whatever you want in the chat. It's all good, brother. All good. It is nice to see people cultivate their points and their intellect. I agree. If I was a naturalist, I could even grant the events of the Bible just have to be aliens or some incredibly improbable naturalistic event. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you need more than just the one piece of evidence to confirm it as divinely inspired. So, totally. Just know I'm paying very close attention, listening. Good, brother. Appreciate you. Thank you.
I guess I would have to be agnostic to such.
So you're not sure. But it sounds like you're automatically defaulting by even though I appreciate you saying you don't know, you're defaulting in any person if you don't have necessarily any sort of reason or any sort of evidence or grounds to say that your mind is accurate. It sounds like you're automatically having to default to that when you're analyzing any sort of evidence because you've concluded to something. So that means that maybe you don't know that source, but you're defaulting to yes, right?
I'm not really defaulting to yes.
Well, then you couldn't say that there's evidence then for
well, I'm not saying
non-God
okay.
world.
So I don't know. I have no way in determining my perception to be accurate, but through that perception that I hold, I'm using this form of perception to justify my position. But now I inquire, why would that not be a two-way street?
Well, you don't know if the tool is actually accurate. Well, you said that you don't actually know if the tool is accurate or not to actually interpret it correctly, but you're just going to use it anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so it could be deceiving you. There's a possibility for that, right? Your mind.
Yeah, but if that was the case, I would have believed that I would have died using this like necessary standard and inferential rule. Let's say I see a cliff, or I don't see a cliff. Like, how do I know through my perception?
Cannot deceive you.
I'm not in a death scenario in every instance.
Well, sure, but it could deceive you on different levels. This is the entire point that I'm getting
Such
at.
as?
Whether the data in regards to beliefs could be made up in specifics.
Can you present an analogy? Because now I'm kind of like confused as to how.
No, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying deceit in every sort of aspect of your life, but I'm saying in regards
neither
to.
am I. I'm just asking you. Okay, so such as that's what I'm asking. I'm inquiring what such beliefs.
Well, okay, so the original point that I was bringing up is how do you know that your mind is actually working accurately to be able to interpret data? And I mean, I think everyone can realize that they have biases that tend us to pull us in a certain direction when it comes to any sort of decision making or belief system that we have. So all people are not really neutral. Could you agree with that?
Yeah, sure, on a level, yeah.
Okay. So you have been arbitrarily attracted to the non-God world. I have been arbitrarily attracted to the God world, right?
Well, I don't think I would say it's arbitrary. If you're going to say through my perception, which is nothing is indicative of what I'm seeing is correct, or I can't determine that, then sure, in that scenario. But I believe it's like intersubjective. We both hold the same level of perception. Would you disagree? Because how would you come to determining what you're reading of the Bible?
In the non-God world, we couldn't determine that. We would have no idea.
Okay, but how do you determine what you're reading of the Bible to be accurate as well?
Because I'll answer this because I think Bandy's going down tight. So, Monkey Boy says, so we both have sort of our minds could be deceiving both of us, right? Logic, mental faculties could be invalid given my non-God assertion, my non-God worldview. But then he turns the question onto Bandu and he says, so given the truth of that claim that my faculties might be not grounded in anything, might not be real, how do you then read the Bible and expect it to be true? Well, there's a really crucial difference. Bandu reads the Bible expecting his logical and mental faculties to be accurate because of his worldview that it's grounded in the rational mind of God. Monkey Boy, when he reads the Bible or anything, if his rational, logical mind is not grounded in God, then he has no idea whether he's being deceived. But for the theist and the Christian, you have reason to expect that you're not being deceived. So that's the important difference. Monkey Boy is assuming that everybody works on this same solipsistic level, when actually your worldview decides whether you can reasonably trust your faculties or not. So Graham Oppie has a similar response where he comes up with a naturalistic explanation to everything. It will always have less metaphysical commitments than supernatural ones. Appeal to Occam's razor. That's interesting. Graham Oppie is a really famous and accredited philosopher. And this is something that Infamous often says, that the naturalistic explanation has fewer metaphysical commitments. I disagree with that. I think it has more than naturalistic. The naturalistic explanation has to incorporate all the transcendental categories and morality and ethics, and I don't know, probably some other things within this sort of chaotic randomness of natural evolution or physics or biology, which isn't obvious that those things follow. Like, if you just take physics, if you just take evolution, it's not at all clear that morality, like a proper morality, would come out of that. The only way that a proper morality is going to easily and seamlessly come out of a biological system or an evolutionary system is if there is a higher power, sort of guiding those things out of the biological. So I think it's actually, you have to presume more things to have the world that we live in, this logical sort of framework that we live in, than under a naturalistic view, than if there's one single God who determines all these things. That's much simpler explanation than all these things happen to randomly appear, happen to randomly, instantiate themselves through the chaos of nature. That seems to me much less likely. That's not Occam's razor at all. That's like the opposite. I think the preceptor is arguing that the worldview can't allow for the possibility of your mind being deceitful, and that atheistic worldviews don't have some metaphysical being to prevent those situations. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Bandu could be a little clearer here, but he seems like a young guy too, just trying his best, so I'm not going to be too critical on him. I'm just showing how I would alter these arguments, how I would respond to Monkey Boy for these.
But in the in the God world, I know that I have the instruction manuals of mankind, that specifically said they made the humans in a certain way, that their minds are like their creators, and that they can interact with their world accurately, and they can actually the senses that they use every single day are to keep them alive are actually reliable. Because I don't know that because I'm telling myself that. I know that because the source of my creation or the source of my existence is telling me that.
Okay, and the reason you believe in the source is because it is consistent, correct?
What was that question?
That you believe in the source and the derivation to be true because it's consistent.
The source in what to be true?
The Bible. Like, you believe the Bible to be true because it's consistent.
Well,
right?
We would expect it to be, if it was God's word, it would testify to his truthfulness, yeah. But the entire point here is that you don't even know the reality that you're experiencing is actually true or not. Is that correct?
Hold on. So since you believe it's consistent, right?
Well, hold on. Can we do a little bit more into your worldview, and then we could dive back in maybe 5 minutes. But I just want to make sure the time's even with how far we're going back and forth. So
okay, but
yeah, so you said that
I just want to hope we don't lose recollection of that point.
Yeah, I mean, I can write that down, or you can write it down if you want to make sure to ask me in 5 minutes. But yeah, so you don't know that your mind's working accurately, but I just want to make sure that you wouldn't even know the reality that you're experiencing is actually accurate as well. Then, right?
I guess so.
That's a big concession. That's a huge concession right there. So how do you have a worldview if you really don't know that it can be, that it's accurate, that it's, or at least that it's even defensible? Really is the point. So Monkey Boy makes a pretty big concession here. Let's see how Bandu deals with that. Okay, and so the appeal to Occam's razor is the type where the supernatural is contested more than the natural, and thus it's safer. I would actually agree with the naturalists, but they face worse issues like the problem with empiricism. Yeah, I understand that, but I still don't think it fulfills Occam's razor for the very reason that Occam's razor says the simplest explanation of a set of facts is probably the right one, right? It's more often correct than incorrect. But the simplest explanation of the facts of the transcendental categories being objectively existent is not that the material world created them. That would be an extremely complicated. That would require, it's almost like a fine-tuning. It would require a lot of material sort of factors to coalesce with no guiding principle and agree with each other and be self-consistent, or be internally consistent, and all these things. It would require so much more coming together of disjointed, disunified, chaotic parts into something that just by random chance happens to be coherent and logical and structured. Whereas the God worldview only requires one entity, one being, to be that logical, rational thing from which everything else flows out. So the Occam's razor, to me, would agree with the God hypothesis more so than the materialist hypothesis. And an argument for the existence of God on the basis of simplicity, as it doesn't need to presume much, which makes it less prone to probabilistic unlikelihoods. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And then, to be clear, Numenon likes the presupps argument if he's arguing that a metaphysical being preventing skeptical scenarios must be assumed. Yeah, I think you do have to, and it seems like Monkey Boy's going to have to, because he doesn't know that his worldview, that his mental faculties even comport with reality, or that reality is trustworthy. So on some level, in order to have a conversation about reality, he's going to have to assume that reality is trustworthy. Well, how do you do that? You have to assume the transcendental categories are valid. Okay, then what do you ground those in? And I think the only answer is God. Otherwise, you get this strange confluence of material processes that don't need to coalesce into what we have today. In fact, it's much more likely that they wouldn't. The naturalist has a big issue with trying to reduce everything to natural events, kind of like how they have trouble with consciousness in the sense Occam's razor might backfire. Yeah, I think Occam's razor does not explain naturalistically how consciousness comes out. I heard a really interesting quote. I think it was on Wes Huff on he did a new interview with Andrew Schultz, and he said, the miracle that atheists contend with the most, or even just non-Christians contend with the most, is that the non-living Jesus came back to life. That life was given, or, that he gave himself or whatever. That the non-living Jesus got life, became alive again. And what the naturalist argues is that non-living atoms, non-living cells, non-living material created the entire multiplicity of life. So which one is Occam's razor, right? That one guy, one man who is also God, rose from the dead, which would confirm God's nature of bringing life from non-living things, or that everything we know in existence that is living came to life from non-living material, but that could never happen again. That could never be the case again. Yeah, that's a radical claim. I think it makes much more sense that his nature is to breathe life into things which are otherwise unliving. And that's why we get this biological evolution, or whatever it is, of non-living matter forming and creating living matter. So hopefully that's
anything
sufficient.
in your perspective.
I think, therefore I am.
Wait, how do you know that non-existence also doesn't think?
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so you said that you know that you are because you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying, so how can you say that nothing doesn't also think?
How do I know nothing also doesn't exist?
Yeah,
Or
you
think?
are, right? You are
Okay.
because you think, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying, then why do you automatically assume that nothing doesn't also think?
I'm pretty sure that's a self-evident analytical truth. If something is nothing, it possesses nothing, how would it hold agency or be an agent in some mind?
Have you experienced all of nothingness?
Have I experienced all of nothingness? I don't believe anyone has experienced nothingness.
Okay, so if you have not experienced,
abstract concept.
nor has anyone else experienced all of nothingness, we can't draw the conclusion that nothingness also doesn't think. So
I
which
don't
would
believe-
invalidate your initial premise.
No, I think axiomatic at the position that you can't in any way conceive of nothingness. There's no
Where
way
your
to
actions
interact
derive
or
from.
Where do my actions derive from?
Axioms.
Oh, my axioms. They're dogmatic. They're foundational to the intelligibility of reality.
Okay, so he admits
But
he
you
has
said
a
you don't
dogma.
even know-
axioms.
But you don't even know the reality that you're experiencing is actually true or not.
Through axioms, I do.
How are you perceiving these axioms?
Yeah, well, you keep asking how do I perceive them. That's very nebulous. What do you mean? You gotta
Just ask him what they
How do
are.
I perceive them?
Just ask him what the axioms are, and then maybe get into to like how he perceives them. That would be the precept way. But first, you have to ask him what those axioms are that he accepts in order to perceive reality. Okay, so the kind of the issue of abiogenesis within the scientists. Abiogenesis states that life came from non-living things, but how can that be the case? Exactly. You don't believe in the God that gives life to Jesus, and yet you believe in, I guess, nature giving life to everything. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. And yeah, if Monkey Boy is going to be dogmatic and that's a valid way to argue and perceive the world, then there's nothing actually wrong with being dogmatic on the other side, especially if he has no grounding for his axioms. So questions of abiogenesis, consciousness, and by extension, psychic phenomena have made me realize that there are forces beyond our understanding in our world. Yeah, that's a great way to come to these understandings for sure. And it's just written on our hearts. We can look around and we can say, something is going on here. Life craves order. Existence craves, like, I guess order is the best way to put it. And how is that explained if the universe is fundamentally chaotic and random and neutral? It's not explained. Okay, unfortunately, I think it's time for me to go. I've had a really fun time. We'll get back into Monkey Boy and these kind of precept arguments. These are the strongest arguments that I can make, the precepts. I think they're the strongest ones that anyone can make, and I think we're seeing the power of them in this stream by comparing these sort of debate tactics and these debaters. I would be interested in debating Monkey Boy directly. I think that would be cool. Maybe I'll reach out to him, or maybe we can set something up. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys. I think we had a great chat today. Really fun and insightful, and a lot of great ideas, popping up and things we can discuss. We have a large amount of agreement, so today is it's a little more debate-oriented ones we have, which I'm still happy to do. If anyone likes debates, if anyone enjoyed the stream, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when we're going. Go ahead and join the Discord if you want. And we'll be doing this Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every week around noon PST. Numenon says to Marshall, I think consciousness is the worst one for physicalism. Like, how would you even attempt to reduce your qualia to the things you perceive? At most, you could correlate them. Yeah, totally. So, ton of fun, guys. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Outside of transcendent mind, 100%. These things are unbeatable. There's no justification for the transcendental qualities outside of a transcendent mind, right? God bless you all, guys. God bless you. God be with you. Christ is risen. Love you.